I'd like to call Rodney Hyatt.
Mr. Hyatt, I don't recall that the appellant stood up and was sworn in. Did you do that? Please raise your right hand. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Trying to get my headsets on too.
State your full name, please.
Rodney Hyatt.
Hyatt, where are you employed?
Louisiana State Police.
How long have you been so employed?
I've been employed since January 24th, 1998, approximately 20 years.
Okay. And what was your position in October of 2016?
I served in a section called Operational Development. That section is responsible for policy, for planning, legislative affairs. You pretty much serve as the colonel's staff and the lieutenant colonel's staff for whatever their needs are, and research projects, special projects, anything that they see fit, they would utilize us.
Before we get into the facts of this, would you look at Exhibit J79 with me?
Yes, sir.
Would you look at subsection 2, 3I's C? Would you read that to the committee?
It says, all DPS commission personnel are governed by the Law Enforcement Officers' Bill of Rights, Louisiana Revised Statute 40:2531.
And was that provision applicable in 2016?
Yes, sir, it was.
And did you rely on that provision, sir?
Yes, sir, I did.
You would look at subsection 5, (2B), and I want to refer you. I'm just going to go through some policies right now to kind of get them out of the way, Rodney.
Yes, sir.
But you were interviewed on February 20th and February 21st by Major Flincham and then Captain McClendon. Is that right?
That is correct, sir.
Okay. Were the interviews conducted in a secure area?
They were conducted in Major Flincham's office behind a closed door.
Okay. And how long did the interview last on the 20th?
On the 20th?
Your interview?
My interview, they questioned me from approximately, I would say it ranged between 30 minutes to an hour. It was closer to an hour, it felt like to me.
Okay. And were you given your rights at the beginning of the interview?
No, sir, I was not.
Okay. Were you again interviewed on February 21st?
Yes, sir, I was.
Were you again confined in a secure area?
Yes, sir.
Were you separated from the other appellants?
Yes, sir, we were.
And were you instructed not to talk to anybody about the investigation?
I couldn't remember if that was one of the requirements they told me.
Now, if you would look at well, first of all, how long did that second interview last?
That one was approximately 30 minutes.
We're going to come back to that later, but I just wanted to cover these policies. Now, would you look at section 5D of the same policy, subpart, 5IID, subsection D?
Yes, sir.
Would you read that?
There's all DPS employees having knowledge of the alleged incident or information related thereto shall be required to provide a recorded statement.
Were all employees of the Department of Public Safety with knowledge of this incident required to give a statement?
We were required to give a statement. Yes,
Well, the question is, were all people that had knowledge of this incident required to give a statement?
no, sir.
My question is, was Colonel Mike Edmondson required to give a statement?
No, sir, it was not.
And to your knowledge, did he give a statement?
No, sir, he did not.
On the 21st, were you given your administrative rights?
No, sir.
Would you describe the questioning on the 20th insofar as the degree, just describe it the best you can.
When I got there, they asked me about the trip. They went into asking me about how the trip developed, questions about the trip and specifically where we were going, how we did this throughout the trip. They specifically asked a specific question, which at that point in time, I pretty much understood what was about to happen. And
But tell the commission what you understood. What did you think was happening when these people, excuse me, when I say these people, Major Clinton, who I respect, and Mr. Captain Clinton, who I respect, when these two folks were questioning you, what's going through your mind, Rodney? You think this is good?
Well, I just read an article in the paper that pretty much said that I was going to be under investigation and I was probably going to be disciplined.
You're referring to the February 18th interview with Mr. Mustang that was reported in the February 19th Morning Advocate?
Yes, sir, I am.
And did that article alert you to the fact that there was, that the colonel had in his mind this might lead to disciplinary action?
It did for me, and the questions they were asking were very specific questions that could not be directly answered that seemed to cover that fact up, to help protect him. Like, were you ordered to go to Las Vegas? Well, I mean, that's not a direct question you can answer. I mean, it's not a, I mean, no one sit there and said, you will go to Las Vegas, this will happen. I mean, it's not an ordered question. In the way they were asking them, you pretty much got the feeling that this is, we were going to be the scapegoats. This was it. This was going to fall on us.
Did you feel as if you were on the defensive?
I felt that this was an interrogation to discover the evidence, to find what they needed to find, to put this on us. And at that point in time, I knew that that was probably what was going to happen.
What about the next day?
Well,
more of the same?
The next day we get questioned, and I'll refer back to, now I'm listening to my colonel pretty much lie and say he pretty much had no knowledge of us going on this trip or anything. And then we still getting questioned about certain things. There were specific questions. I remember there was note-taking at the time. The investigators were taking notes as we would talk and interact and answer questions. And based on policy, you have to cooperate with all investigations. It's a policy requirement.
Was your level of anxiety heightened in the second day, sir?
It was heightened throughout. It was, we were all scared. I was scared. I was like, I can't keep, a lie was just told. We didn't know what to do. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what I was supposed to do. You don't know who's going to be, what this colonel is going to say, what am I going to say, and then how's this colonel going to respond to what I say? He's the ultimate authority. He controls everything in our lives. And at that point in time, I don't know what I'm going to do. I don't know what I'm supposed to do. I'm just doing the best I can to weigh this out, to weigh the situation out, to, when if I say something about another colonel who did have knowledge of everything, who knew what was going on, and now he reads everything and he sees it, and it's like, well, now why'd you throw me under the bus? And now I'm fearful that we're gonna be retaliated against because of all of this line of questioning.
This fear, this anxiety, this trepidation you're going through on the 20th and 21st, and in the ensuing weeks, when were you first read your rights?
It was the 22nd, oh, not the 22nd, it was when I went to questioning, the first time I ever went to questioning.
That was in March, or more than a month later, was that right?
Yes, sir.
I want you to look at policy 221 with me. Look at the top section too.
What's the exhibit number?
J81.
Yes, sir.
Will you read subsection 2?
Let's go. Officers shall refer to the Louisiana Travel Guide, which is posted on the Office of State Purchasing and Travel website to determine reimbursement applicability.
Okay. Do you know, Rodney, we previously had some testimony about you worked in the section that deals with policy too. Is that correct? Were you familiar with the Louisiana Travel Guide in toto at that time?
Yes, sir, I was. We refer to it when we do our expense reimbursement.
Okay. Did you have any policy? There's a provision in that policy that says, I think, that you required to take the most direct route.
Yes,
You
sir.
familiar with that policy, sir?
I am familiar with the policy, and I do recall that during all this happening, I went back and I actually read the entire policy, and that's when I discovered the language in there.
Well, my real question is, were you familiar with that policy in October of 2016 before going on the trip?
No, sir. We didn't know that. No
Was
one
there
did.
anything in the policy and procedure manual that you were familiar with, or anywhere that you've been able to discern even since then, that refers a trooper to the state travel guide to determine routes?
There's the only thing that the state police policy and procedure references you to is to reimbursement, not to travel. It only after the fact. It tells you where to go.
All right, sir. If you look at 221 with me, subsection 4, number 4, subsection V, of 5, I guess is Roman, little 5. Would you read that?
It says, if accommodations cannot be obtained within rates authorized, justification explaining why less expensive accommodations cannot be found must accompany the request for exception. Requests for exceptions lacking clear and convincing justification will not be approved.
Okay. In fact, did you utilize that provision?
The way it was designed, or the way it worked during the administration and me traveling with the colonels quite frequently and quite often throughout, is we would book the lodging, and if the lodging was over the state authorized rate, generally we would receive an email from Management and Finance, and in that email from Management and Finance, it would request or require you to explain why you had overages, and you did that, and you sent it back to them and waited for a response. And that's how we did things.
All right. And did that occur, did you follow that same practice in this case?
I did. I received an email from Candy Diaz asking about the hotel overages. I provide justification for them, and I never heard anything back.
All right, would you look at number 8J89?
Yes, sir.
And is that the email that you received from Ms. Diaz?
Yes, sir, it is.
And she's with Management and Finance?
Yes, sir, she is. I copied my captain, and then also her bosses on it as well.
Okay. And was that your effort to comply with the provision that allows for some overages to be approved if there's justification for it?
Yes, sir.
Did you submit the justification?
Yes, sir, I did.
Was it approved?
I never heard back from anybody. It was approved by my supervisor. It was approved by them. I never heard back. They said that if it didn't require justification, they would send me something for reimbursement.
And did you ever receive something that you had to reimburse?
No, sir, I did not.
You did reimburse later, but we'll come
Yes, sir.
back to that. Okay. And is there a similar provision that you've now learned in the Louisiana Travel Guide for overages? Same thing?
Yes, sir.
I want to refer you to 221, policy 221, subsection, section 10, subsection little ii. It relates to that form 1382 we've had a lot of discussion about.
Yes, sir.
Read the provision.
It says all applicable blanks must be filled in on the DPSMF 1382. Improperly filled expense accounts will be returned for correction.
Okay. When you were told your expense account was not properly, were you ever told your expense account was not properly filled out?
You know, when we completed those things, we completed them with what we thought was within the guidelines. My supervisors, who all went on the trip also, who knew direct knowledge of where I went, where I was going, where I stayed, approved those forms. Later on, they were returned to me saying, hey, they're not filled out correctly. After a higher supervisor reviewed them and requested that I fill them out this way, a certain way, claim every tier city. We filled them out again and we sent them up, and they were approved by my supervisor and then up the chain again.
Okay. So did you comply with this rule?
I did, yes, sir.
And it doesn't say anything like if you don't fill out this form right, you're gonna, take a $10,000 hit for the rest of your life.
No, sir.
If you look at 221 subsection 12, would you read that?
It says falsification of expense accounts restrictions. No employee shall knowingly and intentionally falsify the DPSMF 1382 or approve a falsified one.
Did you knowingly or intentionally falsify your 1382?
No, sir, we never did, and we were never cited for that. And I'm quite certain that none of my supervisors approved a falsified one either.
I want to refer you to order policy number 801 regarding administration. I think was referred to by the Colonel in his testimony on Friday.
Exhibit number, please.
It is exhibit number excuse me. For some reason I didn't write that one down. The exhibit number.
I'm going to ask that the witness use the official exhibit book.
Excuse me?
I'm going to ask that the witness use the official exhibit book and not any notes or anything just brought up there.
Oh,
This time, you have to look at the.
Yes.
You're not supposed to look at notes during the testimony unless you're in correction.
well. I'm not sure 801 is in there.
Was part of 78.
78. Would you look at number 78, exhibit J, 78? you go to, I think it's page 5 of 6, but that's not what I'm interested in. I have a copy of 801. I'm gonna show you, Rodney, and I'm gonna mark as 13.
Yes.
Color 13. Would you look at 801 subpart 3 regarding case investigations?
Yes, it's in the book right here.
Which exhibit?
It's under there, they're all piled together, it's like all the policies are piled together.
Oh,
Under
okay.
79.
Okay, in 70.
78.
So I withdraw.
Yeah, 78.
I withdraw, and since it's in 78, it's on 78, I withdraw this one. Would you read that?
How many pages are you on? Yeah.
It's in 78, they're not numbered by page.
From the front document though, how many pages do you go back, if you don't mind? It's a lot.
1, 2, 3, 15 or so pages. It's, you'll see the policy, it says 801 for internal affairs.
What particular section are you calling our attention to?
1A, excuse me, 3A. You with me, Ron?
Yeah, I'm with you, sir. Yes, sir.
Would you read section 3, little I, subsection A?
It says, all cases shall be completed within the time allowed by Louisiana Revised Statute 40-25-31. It's the Police Officers Bill of Rights.
If the investigation in this matter started on February 18th, when it was announced by the Colonel Edmondson, was it completed timely, sir?
It would not have been, no, sir.
If it started on the 20th of February, when you were questioned for a half hour to an hour and a half, to an hour as you previously described, and at the same time, these individuals, three other individuals questioned similarly while segregated from you and while in a secure area with just you and the 2 IA investigators in the room. It started on that day. Was it completed timely?
No, sir, it would not have been.
If it started on February 21st, when you were called back before IA and questioned for another half an hour or so, asked specific questions about policy and so forth, when you were concerned and worried about being disciplined, was it completed in a timely fashion, sir?
It would not have been.
Now, I want you to refer you to 82, Exhibit J 82. Relates to the Code of Conduct, it's policy number 901. You have that?
Yes, sir, I do.
I'm going to refer you to, when the Colonel testified the other day, when Colonel Reeves testified the other day, he talked about lawful orders, and he talked about lawful orders, as I recall his testimony, relating to violations of being lawful, or a violation of law, violation of ethics, violation of excuse me. Would you read the section 13 on lawful orders, sir?
Says a commissioned officer shall promptly obey and execute any and all lawful orders of the superior officer. A lawful order is any order or assignment issued either verbally or in writing by a supervisor or ranking officer. A commissioned officer shall not obey any order which he knows or should have known to have been would require him to commit an illegal act.
Did you receive any orders and instructions that would have required you to commit an illegal act?
No, sir, I did not.
Now, the colonel included in his testimony information about, a reference to ethics. Were you in conjunction with this trip investigated for a number of months by the Ethics Commission?
Yes, sir. It was about a year-long investigation. They questioned me and others on much of the documents that are here today, the timesheets, the expense account sheets, everything most of everything has been produced here today.
And were you exonerated by that investigation, sir?
Yes, sir. At the conclusion of their investigation, they found that Colonel Edmondson obviously knew about the trip, approved the trip. All of our overtime requests and any request that we had was approved by all of our supervisors.
It's 13 now, my number.
Yes.
I'm going to show you exhibit. I'm going to mark as appellate number 13. Is that the decision from the Ethics Commission, sir?
It says the investigation further revealed that you were instructed by former LSP Superintendent Colonel Mike Edmondson to travel to San Diego using the northern route with stops at the Grand Canyon and Las Vegas. Colonel Edmondson was aware of and approved your stops along the northern route. It was also revealed that your superiors within LSP approved your reimbursements and overtime requests. Based on the totality of circumstances, the board has concluded and instructed me to inform you that the board has instructed the staff to close the file.
In conjunction with the witness's testimony, I'd like to offer, introduce, and file exhibit A13, appellate 13.
We're going to object to the introduction of the document. There's no basis provided upon which they made a determination, and the appellant hasn't been charged with a violation of any of the code of ethics, and that board only has the authority to investigate code of ethics violations.
In his testimony on Friday, surprising to me, Colonel Reeves discussed the violation of ethics and disobeying a lawful order. I didn't bring that up. Colonel Reeves brought that up, and we are responding to that.
Overruled, we're going to admit it.
Could we save some time? I have the exhibits as it relates to Darrell Williams, same conclusion, and Thurman Miller. I'd like to put those in evidence rather than have to go through the authentication of those documents. I'd like to mark Miller as 14 and Williams as 15, appellant 15.
And we have the same objection that the findings that the board based its decision on are not known to the agency, as their records are confidential, and they were not charged with an ethical violation.
And no objection to the fact that Mr. Miller or Mr. Williams is not testifying about it. Overruled, we're going to do it.
Now, Mr. Hyatt, I'm going to take you back to the beginning. I'm kind of going through some policy, but I want to take you back to the beginning. When I need you to give this commission an understanding of how all of this evolved. would you tell me when you were first contacted, when's the first thing you hear about SPOS 2016? I know you were familiar with SPOS and IACP in prior, but what did you first hear about 2016?
Yes, sir. I think what's important to go back to or to understand and realize is our position, or my position at the time. And when you're the colonel's staff, you're expected to do a number of things. And I think that played into a part of going on the trip when he asked. It wasn't asked question, do you want to go to the IACP conference? And I said, yes, sir, I do. And if you do go, you will have to drive. Well, I don't question that because my colonel just asked me to do something. And maybe that's my fault for not wanting to be the no man, for wanting to be the one you can depend on. Of all my career and everything we've ever done was for the betterment of the state police and the betterment of the troopers. We spent countless hours, countless times with receiving no compensation, working down at the legislative session to pass laws for the benefit of the troopers, for the benefit of the state police and the department. And I guess I always wanted to be that guy that they can depend on, whether it be for driving, whether it be for anything. I knew what my role was. My role was always to be somewhat of a driver to both Colonel Dupuy and Colonel Edmondson. And that's what I did. I was also the protective service detail for the Speaker of the House for a number of years. During this time, when the Colonel asked me if I wanted to go, I'm not going to say no to that. That's an opportunity. You want to be always the one to be positive about it. I did say yes. I did agree to it. And during that time...
Well, let me ask you this. You were told to drive to California, right?
Yes, sir.
Did you consider that to be an unlawful order?
No, sir, I did not.
Were you excited about driving to California or not?
I really wasn't excited about driving anywhere, especially that long of a distance, because at the time it was just, to my knowledge, I was the only one that was discussed or knew about it. But as the trip progressed, or as things progressed, I later learned that Captain Greg Raffey was supposed to be in the vehicle, and then he wasn't. And then Lieutenant Colonel Jason Starnes was supposed to be in the vehicle, and then he wasn't. And then it kept changing and it kept evolving. So I didn't know who was going to be in this vehicle as we kept getting closer and closer. Then I learned later on it was Darrell Williams, and then later on Thurman Miller. So the
were those your choices or were those instructions you received?
Those were instructions I was receiving during the time. And I remember going to Colonel Dupuy and talking about the route and what we were going to do. And then he was like, I'm going to go with y'all. And then he was going to be the one going with us. And that changed. So as we're going through this whole process, things keep changing, things keep evolving.
Well, it seems to me in the questioning from the legal office of the state police, the questions were designed that you failed to properly plan this trip. Could you plan the trip as it evolved?
It kept evolving and it kept changing. My mission statements kept changing as to who was going to be in the vehicle, what we were going to be doing. When it came down to it, I asked several times Colonel Dupuy the route to take and what to go. And he did say you should drive straight through. That was only one thing he said. He did suggest taking I-10. He did suggest stopping at certain stops along I-10. And when we told this plan to Colonel Edmondson, he said, whatever you do, don't take I-10. And so then we were kind of like, well, whatever. I'm just going to wait for him to tell me what I need to do.
So did you plan out where you were going to stop in advance?
No, sir, we didn't.
Okay. Did you feel that under the circumstances that were evolving that you could plan out in advance what you were going to do?
No, sir, because of the trip and talking to Colonel Dupuy about it, he agreed that because you didn't know, there's certain factors in driving of how tired you were going to be, whether it be a wreck on the interstate, and a number of factors, that the planning or where we were going to be staying could not be feasible, wouldn't be feasible.
As you got closer to the trip, let's say 4 days out, just, I don't know where I got 4 from, you could say 5 days, I don't care what you say. But did you know enough yet about who was going and what was going to, when you were going to leave and so forth, to go ahead and make the plans?
When it got closer, there was probably a point where, in hindsight and looking at things, and hindsight's always the greatest tool of all things, there's obviously some things that could have been done better, but I was listening to my colonels, I was listening to the advice of them. I know during that morning that there was no doubt that they all knew what was going to take place, where we were going, what we were doing.
I want to take you to the morning of October 10th. Tell the commission what evolved.
So that morning, I told everybody to be there.
What time do you plan on leaving?
We were going to leave 7 in the morning. I told everybody to be there, and probably at that point in time, we still wasn't sure where we were going to go. We were going to go fill them in and let them know at that point in time that were the colonels and Charlie and all that we were probably just going to head out.
Rodney, Colonel Reeves made a big point that Darrell Williams was a major, you were a lieutenant. He had more order, and he should have been calling the shots. Who was getting orders directly from the colonel? Was it you or Darrell Williams?
It was me. Darrell Williams was not getting any information from the command staff, because I served with the command. I was their guy at the time.
That's changed that.
Yes, sir.
But in any event, you were getting your instructions directly from the colonel. Did Darrell Williams assume a position of the commander of this 4-man group as you traveled to California?
There was no need to have a person of any authority. We were getting all of our direction from our chain of command, from the colonels, from the very top.
And how were you getting them?
Through phone calls, through text message and emails, and responding to them. Both Colonel Edmondson and Colonel Dupuy were getting all of these. They would call every day, want to know where we were staying, what we were doing, where we planned on going next. It was always a constant contact with all of them.
I'm going to show you, did you extract a phone log from your cell phone?
Yes, sir, I did.
Okay, I'm going to show you a document. Here's, I think, this is different. I think it is. I'm going to show you a document number marked appellant number 16. Would you look at that?
Yes, sir.
What's the time period for those telephone calls or the logs?
October 10th, 2016 to October 20th of 2016.
Were you getting instructions as you went along the way, sir?
Yes, sir. We were keeping them advised, and they were relaying stuff to us as we do it. Yes, sir.
Okay. And does that reflect the calls you made to command staff?
And the calls I received, actually. Most of them were received calls.
That was on a daily basis, is that correct?
Just about, yes, sir.
Okay. So getting back to my point, can we single out and say, okay, Darrell Williams, you should have been in charge of all of this. Where were the instructions coming from?
They were coming from our colonels at the time.
In conjunction with the witness's testimony, I'd offer, introduce, and file in evidence as appellate 16 call law.
Any objection?
No objection.
Submitted.
I'm going to, we have some photographs, but did we get all of the photographs that are available and put them in one exhibit?
No, sir, I don't believe we did.
Okay. What is this packet of photographs you clipped together yesterday?
Those are the text messages of a group that contained Colonel Dupuy in the group, as well as being informed.
Okay, it says 6 people.
Yes, that's correct.
And who were the 6 people?
It would have been myself, Major Williams, Thurman Miller, E.J. Chesney, Colonel Dupuy, and Lieutenant Colonel Jason Starnes.
And who is E.J. Chesney?
Just an employee, he worked at the training academy. I think he was lieutenant for Darrell Williams at the time.
Okay.
Was.
And these are photographs and emails that you sent along to, or your wife, I think your wife actually did.
That was our group that we sent, yes.
That was, so, and Colonel Edmondson got some of the same.
Yes, sir.
We had the emails on the way to the dam. What dam was that?
Just Hoover Dam, sir.
Okay. We have the statement in here, and I think Colonel Dupree testified about it. It says the boss wants to send him pics also. Who was the boss?
It was Lieutenant Colonel, excuse me, I'm sorry, sir, it was Colonel Edmondson at the time. And what I was going to say is Lieutenant Colonel Dupuy had asked us to take pictures at every state line and send it to him. That's why the pictures of the state lines are in there.
Okay. One email says Grand Canyon.
Yes, sir.
Did y'all ever conceal any portion of your trip out there from the command staff?
We never concealed it from the general public either. It was always open. I think we were posting Facebook posts at the time.
Colonel Edmondson have a comment about that?
He did.
And what was it?
He had called me in Las Vegas, asked me where I was staying. I told him we were at the Palazzo. He then said, he didn't question about the posting of the stuff on Facebook, about my wife's post, and he requested that we don't do that. And then he asked me if my conference started the next day. I said, yes, sir, it did. And he said, you need to hurry up and get there. I said, yes, sir.
And was he angry in that exchange?
No, he wasn't angry. He just, that was his motive. Just, you need to hurry up and get there. I said, yes, sir.
And did they have any particular symbol on the email that you got from him in that regard?
Well, the one that my wife had texted him was the one at the Hoover Dam. And he said, hurry up and get to San Diego. And then he had a smiley emoji that followed that.
So did you take that as a reprimand of any type?
No, sir, I didn't.
I'm going to, these are photographs you told me that what you refer to as group photographs that sent out to the group.
Yes, sir, they are.
Let me ask you this. Does Major Williams and Sergeant Miller, were they listening to these conversations as they came in?
The first call I got from Colonel Edmondson was on the way on the 10th. Was the first call I received from him. That call right there was in the car, it was in the vehicle, everybody was around. I explained to him that Thurman and Darrell were very excited about seeing the Grand Canyon and the Hoover Dam. They had never seen those places before, and he was okay with all of this.
In conjunction with the witness's testimony, I would offer introduce felony number 17.
I'm going to object to the photos unless Sergeant Hyatt actually took the photos himself and sent them. I'm going to object to them. And also, if they were stipulated to, those were photos that were received during the IA investigation. If there are any, I haven't seen it. If there are any additional photos.
I don't think they are, Michelle. I'm not trying to trick you.
Are these photos that Hyatt was a recipient of or a sender of?
His wife sent them. He wasn't operating a phone. But I can
Yes,
call
I
his
received
wife
them.
today.
You received them?
Yes, I did.
Okay, he's on them, so we.
Some of these photos were seen for the first time. They weren't provided
They were in our motions.
in the internal
They
affairs.
were attached to the motion.
I've never seen this picture.
You know, I did pull that out of Colonel Colonel Starnes in a costume.
Okay.
I did pull that one out. I guess I could take that one out.
To the extent they're not photos that were provided during the IA investigation or stipulated to, reject.
We got to take a recess at this point.
pulled out the two.
We understand what
And your objection?
Our objection was that we hadn't seen them yet. They were additional photos that weren't provided to the IA investigation, but I believe the majority of those have been stipulated to.
So we overrule your objection and admit the exhibit.
Rodney, I'm just trying to clear up a few things here. I have exhibit number 18. I'm going to show you a picture. Tell me if you can identify.
Yes, sir, this is a photograph. When we got to the hotel in Las Vegas, we got to our room, and the first thing I did is took a photograph.
And did you send that on to the group?
I don't remember, I could have, I could not have.
Conjunction of witnesses. My whole point, were you trying to conceal from anybody your whereabouts?
No, sir.
Conjunction of witnesses testimony are all for introducing file exhibit 18.
Ms. Jordan?
No objection.
Now, I want you to see if I could see my exhibits from yesterday's policy 204. I think it's number 6.
Yes.
Now, Rodney, I'm going to show you a document previously introduced as evidence of the felon number 6. You recognize that document?
Yes, sir, this was the state travel regulations we had received later on after the trip and everything.
All right, I want to refer you to page 3. It has a provision K. Would you read that, sir?
Approved travel expense account forms must be submitted to the Office of Management and Finance, Financial Services for review and processing. Travel expense account forms containing any discrepancies in allowable expense rates, mileage, or other limitations, incomplete forms, missing approved travel authorizations, or any other issues will be returned to the employee for corrective actions.
That comport with what you understood the policy to be before it was actually codified into that particular policy and put in writing?
Yes, sir, and then and especially this part that adds, once the travel expense account form has been corrected, it shall be resubmitted to the employee supervisor for approval and forwarded back to Office of Management and Finance, Financial Services for processing.
Okay, and did y'all do that in each case, sir?
Yes, sir, we did.
Could I clarify, I don't have the document in front of me. You said it was the travel regs. Is this travel regs or?
No, it's not the
Okay.
travel reg. It's travel regulations expense reimbursement policy number 02-01.04. It's in the policy and procedures manual under chapter 2 administrative. Would you bring that back a little? Now, if you look at I think the travel regulation is, the travel guide is exhibit 11, if I'm not mistaken. Would you look at 11 with me, Rob? Does it contain, I referenced this earlier, but I wanted to just be sure. Does it contain a reference to hotel overages if you can't get a rate that's within the guide?
It does have that in there.
I'm going to refer you, I'll tell you which page in a second. Page 22.
23. And that's
Must be
where-
23. I can't even read my own name. Would you read that section?
On page 23, under exceptions, routine lodging overage allowances, department head or his designee has the authority to approve actual costs for routine lodging provisions on a case-by-case basis.
And is that what you referred to earlier under the Edmonds administration that Joe routinely did?
Yes, under Colonel Dupuy, who was the department head, that's how we handled business.
Okay. And that's changed now.
Yes, sir.
Okay, but, so at least in regard to the way it was then, the policies and procedures manual and the travel guide were in, both on the same page, in that you could get approval for the overages if you couldn't find a hotel
That's correct, sir.
within the route. I want to talk about that a second. Been a lot of discussion during this about the hotel rates and so forth. Would you explain to this commission what process you and the group went through in trying to locate an acceptable hotel?
So during that breakfast meeting, and it was discussed with Colonel Edmondson and others at the table, who Colonel Dupuy was sitting right on the side, that there would be stops at the Grand Canyon in Las Vegas. At that point in time, Marty Chabert, who was sitting across next to Colonel Edmondson,
Who is Marty Chabert and who does he work for?
he's the head of LSPC, which is the Louisiana Oil Spill Coordinator's Office that serves underneath the Department of Public Safety Services.
He's in Department of Public Safety Services.
One of the budget unit heads, one of the leaders or whatever.
Okay.
At that time, he asked me, hey, y'all going to Vegas? And I said, yes, sir. And he goes, I'm going to try to help you with a room there. I said, okay. And so when we left that morning and we continued on, I think I was the first driver. I drove all the way probably to Dallas, if I remember right. At that point in time, after having my conversation with Colonel Edmondson and with Marty and everybody, I held a room in Las Vegas just to make sure that we would have something there just in case. But as we drove and as the trip would progress, we generally, as a group, would get together to see how everybody was doing, if anybody was tired, where do y'all want to stay at, and we would look for the cheapest hotel on booking.com for that area to try to find the cheapest hotel that we could find.
Well, let's take the first night. I think you stayed at the Marriott in Amarillo, right?
Yes, sir.
Tell me when you started looking, and why didn't you start looking earlier for a hotel in Amarillo?
We had told Colonel Dupuy that we were going to drive until we became tired and we'll start looking for a hotel, and that's would be the process. And he agreed to that. He said that's not a problem. So we began to look for a hotel, probably Childress maybe.
Childress is a couple hours away from Amarillo, right?
Well, it was about 2 hours away. So we knew when we filled up in Childress that we wasn't going to go much further. In talking to everybody, they did say that it was kind of barren desert out that way. So we were using our best judgment at the
Let
time.
me ask you. Thurman Miller had left Natchitoches to meet you by 7 o'clock. What time had he left Natchitoches? Did you find out?
I'm not sure exactly, but from what I understand, he left pretty early from Natchitoches to have to get to where I was at 7 o'clock to meet us.
And how about, I think Thurman, well, I don't want to say what his testimony will be, but if the commission finds out that he left around 4 o'clock in the morning to get to Baton Rouge, he'd been on the road when you were in Childress, what time was that? Late at night?
Probably it was around 46 hours, so closer to 11 o'clock.
That's one of the stipulations. That's when y'all got some gas.
Yes, sir.
And between Childress and Amarillo, you know, I travel that route several times a year. Any hotels along the way there?
It's really not a lot out anywhere along this route.
So when you got to Childress, Thurman had been going since 4 o'clock that morning. How about the rep? And you learned that he had left from where that morning?
I know he lives in Thibodeau, Louisiana, because that's where I used to live, so he would have to leave there at least between 5 and 6 to get there.
Were they getting a little tired?
Yeah, we were all getting a little tired, sir.
All right, sir. So you started looking for a hotel about 2 hours out?
Yes, sir.
And did you find the cheapest place you could find?
Yes, sir. We went to booking.com, we talked about it. I told them, hey, look, this is the cheapest place they have. Is this okay? And we all said, yeah, we'll stay there.
And you knew that you could get, or you thought you could get approval for the overage in accordance with the policies and practices that you were familiar with and the procedures of this department, right?
That's correct. You look for the lowest price that you can possibly find, and then that's what you do.
And in fact, after you interacted with Candy Diaz and so forth and submitted everything to you, they did approve the overage, didn't they not?
Well, that and our credit card statements, that does show the overage on it. That's sent electronically to our supervisors when we sign off on them.
Right. And the court cards were approved, that's where the charges were made on the hotel?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, the next day, and I want to kind of move through this quickly because I think it's covered a lot in the stipulations. But y'all got up early the next, what time did you get down early?
It was, by the time we got settled in the room, we had to unpack, finally get our rooms, get booked or whatever. It's probably 1 in the morning when we finally settled in our rooms.
Your wife told me that she had to take a shower.
I'm gonna object to him testifying.
I
I'd like
agree.
to hear questions and answers.
I agree. I withdraw the question. What time did y'all leave the next morning?
We left approximately between 5 and 6. My memory served me right.
So how much sleep did you have in Amarillo?
Not much.
Where did you go that next day?
Well, in talking to the colonel that morning or whatever, Grand Canyon was one of the destinations, and in keeping up with all of our supervisors, that was always a planned place, so that's where we traveled to. We traveled to the Grand Canyon area. In looking at a room in the Grand Canyon area, they were all very, very expensive, except for in the park itself. The lodgings were quite cheap, but they would not, over the phone, they would not tell you if there was a vacancy. You had to appear in person for any cancellations or to get any vacancies there. So we went to Bright Angel Lodge, and that's where I was looking for a hotel for a vacancy there. They did not have any.
Had you used bookings.com again?
We were all pretty tired, and knowing the route we just took up there, and there's really nothing around that general area. The cheapest hotel at that time was the one we found, and that's where we stayed.
Okay. Next day?
Next day we went to the Hoover Dam and into Las Vegas, but then driving to Las Vegas, where we knew we had a room and lodging, and realizing that it was pretty early, we talked as a group about what do we want to do. Do y'all want to push through, or did y'all want to stay in Vegas?
Trooper Neskazinski was from San Diego, is correct?
That's correct. He was familiar with the area, and
Was he familiar with the route between Las Vegas and San Diego?
he was indeed. He then told us that there's nothing past Las Vegas. And we decided as a group, because we were pretty tired at that time, that we would go ahead and book the rooms that we had held.
And did that room eventually get approved? The cost of that room eventually get approved and set?
Yes, sir, it did.
And the next morning, next day, what did you do?
We woke up, got ready, still pretty tired, then drove into San Diego, talked to Colonel Dupuy, and my primary responsibility was to make sure I was available if anybody needed to ride from the airport.
Were the staff getting in that day, the other people that flew out, were some of them arriving that same day?
Yes, sir, they were.
Did you attend any of the exposed convention that day?
Yes, sir. A small part of it, I was late getting to the convention. That was due to a poor planning on my part, gross miscalculation of time, losing track of time. as far as the time change. Thought it would be a lot quicker to get from the location we were at to there. And I'll be honest with you, there's no excusable thing that can be said about that, sir. And I think I even mentioned that in my internal affairs report to the investigator.
Trying to conceal that fact?
No, sir, I told him that that's on me. As a matter of fact, I think the day before, I knew I was kind of gonna be late for it. I sent an email to Andre Swearingen, I believe, Andre. He was the chairman of the Spokes Conference at that time, telling him I was gonna be late. And I talked to Colonel Edmondson, and I told him I was gonna be late.
Rodney,
At 4.
we're now in San Diego, and I don't want to, if I understand correctly, there's no dispute about the nighttime events that you attended, that those were all, you were instructed to attend those meetings?
Yes, sir, I was, and told several times by Colonel Dupree to charge my time, several times over.
And did you follow those instructions?
I did. He said, whenever you're with us, you need to charge your time. You need to charge your time. You're the only one getting paid to be here, but you need to charge your time. Because as a lieutenant colonel, he's not allowed to earn time, from what I understand.
Now, I think, did you attend, it's Friday, Saturday, you attend the Spokes Conference?
Yes, sir, I did.
You go to the exhibits?
Well, attending is a loose term. You go to your conference, but then you're called out a lot by the command staff. They want you here, they want you there, come meet me here. So it's in between a lot of that. I go where I'm told to go and where they tell me to be.
There is a discussion about 3 meals were included in the exposed conference that you were charged with. 3 meals. Did you eat the meals at the conference?
No, sir, I never did. I never.
Why not, sir?
Because I was always called out to be somewhere else by the command staff. And I'll be honest with you, I never knew that those meals even existed. But that's probably an oversight on my part that I should have called.
If Colonel Dupree or Colonel Edmondson call and tell you to come meet them somewhere at lunch, and you had a free meal or prepaid meal at the convention, did you go to meet the colonels as you were instructed to do?
Yes, sir, I did.
Now, Rodney, I want to talk about Sunday. There's an issue that was raised about your activities on Sunday. Did you have responsibilities that day?
I did.
Would you tell the commission what you did that day?
Sunday.
There's a stipulation that the only activity, I'm not aware of any charge for Sunday for Sergeant Hyatt in there.
I was just trying to get them an overview of what went on at the commission, and it's going to play into my discussion with Major Williams and his activities, and that's what I'm getting to. I'm just trying to lay the groundwork.
There's no charge for Hyatt for Sunday's activities.
Overruled the letter.
Rodney, what did you do on Sunday?
So on Saturday, the night before, I was told by Colonel Dupree and at the time Colonel Edmondson that I was to drive him and some people to Torrey Pines for a meeting.
And did you know what what Major Williams was doing or he was doing on Sunday?
Also that Saturday, I heard Colonel Edmondson tell Major Williams that he was to go play golf with the Motorola people and to talk to them about their camera system or something they were trying to introduce.
Did y'all eventually go to a luncheon at Torrey Pines?
Yes, sir, we did. We went to the luncheon, and then
Was that a business one? Was it a business event?
TriTech was the vendor. We had lunch with the TriTech representatives at that time.
And did y'all discuss business?
The colonel was sitting next to him. The table was kind of big, but they were discussing stuff at that table. I did overhear at the time TriTech we were trying to get a CAD system, and they were trying to sell us on their CAD system. They wanted to sell us They had just bought another company, and this was a more englobo company. It kind of not only covered CAD, it covered a lot of things. And that's the system that he was looking at, but he was trying to deflect him from that system and to go with their original CAD system and then get a separate RMS system.
Were you aware whether or not Colonel Major Williams complied with the instruction he received from Colonel Edmondson to go play golf with the Motorola people?
He did.
Did he have golf clothes on when he came to the luncheon? Did he come to show up at the luncheon?
He did show up to the luncheon later on, because they were playing golf. So we were at the luncheon, and then it was a late lunch, and then it got later and later.
So Third finds that there's a restaurant in this country, correct?
Correct, yes, sir. And it was a bunch of people there, a bunch of dignitaries there at the time.
You had some sheriffs there, some chief of police from San Diego.
Leaving.
Sustained.
I agree.
Yes.
Who was some of the other people that were there?
I couldn't tell you everybody there, but I do know they had some other colonels that I recognized from around the states.
And after that, were you with Colonel Edmondson the rest of the day
I was, yes, sir.
and followed his instructions?
Yes, sir, I did.
I want to take you to Monday, and of course, one of the charges, the charge against you is relates to going to the zoo. Did you go to the zoo?
Yes, sir, I did.
And how long? And then did you go to down the coast and look at the coastline after you left the zoo?
We did. We went to La Jolla and then came back.
Who did?
It was me, my wife, Lieutenant Colonel Starnes, and his fiance.
Lieutenant Colonel Storms is a member of the command staff?
He is, yes, sir. He said, I want to go, it was near the end of the day, and he wanted to go do something. He said, I ain't did anything since I've been here, because the day was over with. At that time, we had done what the Colonel had asked us to do, which was go to one vendor exhibit. And I said, do you need me to get the car? He said, no, we'll just Uber. I said, okay.
The zoo, how long were you there, sir?
The whole trip from the zoo to whatever, which was very quick because we had to be at another event that night that I knew about. So it was a very quick trip from the zoo to going to La Jolla and back was maybe 3.5 hours.
Now, you claimed some time for that, did you?
I did claim some time to that.
Was that an error on your part?
Yeah, and looking back at it, it should have been. Now, nobody wants to admit that I actually was on call because I was. And I knew what my job was. I knew what I was told to do. I was told to be at the ready for the command staff at any time. I knew what my job was while I was there. I knew I was the driver. I knew I had to be ready to do whatever they wanted to get, whatever they needed. That's what I did. But in hindsight, looking back, yeah, and I told the investigators that during the thing, that's on me. That's an oversight on my part. And looking at that, and that's on me.
Any time during the investigation, or any time during the IA investigation, did the department ever tell you, Rodney, you need to reimburse us X number of dollars?
No, sir, they did not.
Well, as I went over with you the travel guide about expense reimbursement and the form, the policy in the state police, and then the codified provision that says you resubmit and have it approved if there's a problem or mistake. Why didn't they tell you, look, you owe us X number of dollars?
I can't answer that question for the department. I can only tell you why I did it, because it was the right thing to do. And looking at it in hindsight and after studying policy more closely, it was the right thing to do.
Did you do it voluntarily?
Yes, sir, I did.
Now, Rodney, did you do an analysis of, when all is said and done, in preparation for our defense in this matter and the motions that we previously submitted, did you have an opportunity to look at timesheets and so forth?
Yes, sir, I did.
And I'm gonna come back to timesheets because I think that's one of the most significant things. But did you also do a reconstruction of hotel charges?
I did, yes, sir.
Okay. I want to talk to you about, prior to writing your response to the colonel, relative to the IA investigation done by Captain Clinton. Did you have any discussions with Colonel Reeves about that?
About hotel expenses?
No, I'll shift gears on you. About getting to look at the report before you write your response.
Yes, sir. I was, which I found odd, and I was at a crawfish boil for the troopers at the Capitol. It was, I believe the Haney's put on a crawfish boil for the troopers. And at this crawfish boil, Colonel Reeves approached me and said, "Rodney, I'm going to give you a copy of the report." And I said, "Colonel, I don't know if you can do that." And he said, "No, I'm going to give you a copy of the report, Rodney." And I said, "Okay." And then when it came time to receive a copy of the report, once I received my letter, I sent an email to him saying, "Hey, Colonel, as discussed, you said he was going to give me a copy of the report so I can write a response." He then had Major Flincham call me from IA and tell me that I could not receive a copy of the report.
Had you also talked to Colonel Reeves about the possibility of speaking with him personally and making a presentation in person?
Yes, sir, we did that. That, you know, what you need to understand too is that, you know, when you write a response, that's a legal response to any charges or whatever. During the time that we had our time, our 7 days, during our 7 days that we had to deliver a response back to the department.
After you got the Laudermill.
After I got my Laudermill letter. Historically, from what I remember, as discipline takes place, is that typically some meetings are allowed. They will meet with you and they will talk to you about what's going on with everything. From that point on, I had just gotten my stuff, my letters, and we're told to sign for them. Nobody ever talked to me about them. Nobody ever said anything about them. I just got a letter. And this was my opportunity to tell the colonel everything, to apologize, to do those certain things. It was Darrell Williams and I were in the hallway right outside of his office, and we ran into him, and we both requested a meeting at the same time. We said, "Colonel, we'd like to meet with you to talk to you about this stuff." And he said, "Rodney, I promise you, before I make a final decision, I'll sit down and meet with y'all."
Well, the Colonel, one of the things that disappointed me a little bit about the Colonel's testimony the other day, other than I thought it was pretty good, but one of the things that disappointed me is he said you never did apologize to him or show remorse. If you had an opportunity, was that one of the reasons you wanted to meet with him, sir? To explain to him where you were coming from about all of this and what instructions you were operating under?
Yes, sir. That was the main reason why I wanted to speak with him on it.
Did he speak with you?
No, sir, he didn't. We got our final letters, and that was, we were demoted. And at that time, I talked to Darrell Williams, and Darrell said, "I'm calling him." I said, "Look, he's not going to meet with us. It's too late now." No, I mean, he said he would meet with us. I'm calling him about it. And then that's when he made a phone call.
Yeah, well, Darrell told us about that. But I sat here over the last few days and I heard Colonel Dupree, Edmondson, and Captain Graffia, all of whom you knew well and worked with on a daily basis for a number of years, all say that they felt, based on their knowledge of you as a person and so forth, that your actions were not knowingly and intentionally to try and obtain money from the state police, Office of State Police. How well did you know Colonel Reeves at this point in time, just after he was appointed superintendent?
I knew of him, but we were not best friends by any means, or talking buddies, if that's what you mean.
Well,
You know him very well.
is that why you wanted to talk to him and tell him how where you were coming from in all of this?
That would have helped out a lot, yes, sir. That's why I wanted an opportunity to speak with him, yes, sir.
I'm gonna go back to the reconstruction of hotel charges. I'm gonna show you a document. Did you prepare something for me?
I did, yes, sir.
I'm gonna show you a document I'm gonna mark, it's exhibit number 19, I think.
Yes.
Tell me what that document is.
This is the hotel charges, if you would abide by what the state travel policy is, compared to what the actual hotel costs were. We were traveling as a group, so as a group, you have to think of everybody in the group. To sit there and single out Thurman for charging a hotel charge is unfair, because he was sharing a room with Negazinski. He was charging it to his credit card. We charged as a group, and looking as a group of what the charges would be. And what this document illustrates or shows that if you would actually follow the state travel records.
That's the column, the two columns on the left, is that right?
That's correct. And what they charged, the number of people that we had during the trip, for the whole time that we were on this trip, including our stay in San Diego, it would have been somewhere around $8,000, close to it.
79, 72, 79.
Yes, sir.
That
We're
would
going to
be-
object to any further reference to this document. This is not about what was charged while they were in San Diego, and we've stipulated to what the state travel regs allow for individual hotel rooms in individual places. I don't think this document is relevant, nor should there be any testimony regarding it when the issue is not the San Diego, and this takes into account San Diego lodging.
It's an effort, this is Mr. Hyatt's effort to try and analyze what the policy provided and what the group actually did.
As far as any reference to the San Diego lodging, it would be inaccurate.
I'm gonna sustain the objection. He can testify to how he analyzed the charges for each night that were subject to the letter of discipline. He can verbally talk about it, but we're not gonna admit a chart, an after-the-fact analysis of what we already have in evidence. We already know what the charges were and what the rules say they should have been.
In regard to the night in Amarillo, the first night, there was some excess charges,
Yes, sir, there was.
and did you get approval for those excess charges?
Yes, sir, we all did.
And on October 11th, were there some excess charges?
Yes, sir, there were.
And did you get approval for the excess charges?
Yes, sir, we did.
October 12th, was there $3 in excess charges for the group,
Yes, sir, there was.
for the whole group?
Yes, sir, we did.
Okay, well, irrespective of how little that was, did y'all get approval for those charges?
Yes, sir.
I'm going to show you, I'll refer you to October 18th, that's the first night on the way home, right?
Yes, sir.
Were there excess charges?
No, sir, there were not. There was a reduction in charges,
How much?
about $272.
And on the night in San Antonio, were there excess charges?
No, sir, there were not. There was a reduction in charge.
In regard to the two nights when there were excess, did you try and minimize those, or take every effort you could to try and minimize excess charges?
Yes, sir, that's what we always were talking
Why
about.
don't you give me that back since you're not interested?
about them, there are many things we might be interested in. We have to go by what we can consider.
I'm with you. Colonel Reeves, in his letter and yet in his testimony on Friday, testified, if I wrote it down correctly, that he viewed your making reimbursement an admission of guilt. Do you view it as an admission of guilt or something else?
It's an admission of doing the right thing. I was acting under Edmondson, under what Colonel Dupuy, all of my supervisors knew where I was going, what I was doing. There's no employee that goes on a trip with his entire chain of command that's going to put anything down that they shouldn't be entitled to after. They're going to review it, they're going to look at it. I would never have done that. When you look at how Colonel Reeves looks at things and how he wants his administration run, there's no doubt in my mind that it's the right thing to do.
To make the reimbursement?
Yeah, absolutely. Regardless of how one administration worked, this is how his administration works. And he's made it quite clear that he doesn't tolerate this kind of stuff. So therefore, it's the right thing to do.
Did you, by making that reimbursement of some $1,300, will you surrender your appellate rights and saying, look, I give up, I did wrong?
No, sir, I don't believe I was.
I want to talk to you about the timesheet. I think you had two different timesheets, correct?
Yes, sir, I did. One was never signed.
I want you to describe the first timesheet and what you did and why you did it.
So when you look at state police policy and procedure, it clearly says in there that you are to charge your time while in transit, especially if you go into a convention, you're to charge your time while in transit. And you look at the Division of Administration policy, statewide policy number 2, which applies to everybody and which supersedes all policies. And if I know where that one, where's that at in the book so I can talk about that one? Or was it even submitted in the book? It's going to be one of the
State travel policy number 2.
11.
Probably number 4, maybe.
So the policy starts off with the employee compensation for overtime will be in accordance with, the State Police Commission rules, so forth and so on. So obviously it applies to us. It then goes on to say that this policy applies to all employees regardless of status or position within the governor's executive cabinet position. And then it says that this overtime policy and leave policy of these agencies are repealed and replaced by this policy. So that gives me the idea this is the sole policy at this point in time.
At least that's what you.
That's what I would have thought, yes, sir. When you look at, it specifically says in one of the provisions under Roman numeral 8, overtime for the attendance of conferences, conventions, and training programs. And basically, when you read that, it says an employee is required by his appointing authority to attend a conference, convention, seminar, workshop, training course, or related activity on weekends, overnight, or outside of normal work hours. All time actually spent participating in program activities shall be designated as hours worked for which compensation at the appropriate rate is required. Then it goes into overtime for travel. It says, while on authorized travel status for official state business purposes, overtime compensation at the appropriate rate is required for the reasonable and necessary time spent outside of regular working hours in transit to and from the destination. Then it specifically talks about conference travel.
Would you refer to this page 5, subsection 2?
Yes,
correct?
yes. And in that specific conference travel, because that's what we were doing, it says approved travel to and from a conference, convention, seminar, workshop, training course, or related activity when attendance is required shall be designated as hours worked for which compensation at the appropriate rate is required. Hours worked cease upon arrival at the destination.
What was your destination when you left for San Diego?
It was always, San Diego was always our destination in my mind.
Rodney, I'm gonna show you 2 additional documents. I'm not gonna offer them in evidence for this, or maybe I will. Did you look at other documents in order to formulate your original timesheet?
I did, yes, sir.
Were you, and I'm specifically talking about the in-transit portion of the timesheet, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Did you look at the wage and hour division, U.S. wage and hour division, hours worked provision regulation 785?
I did, but a lot of that was also for time spent in San Diego and
Okay. And did you look at the Code of Federal Regulations in the electronic printed format?
yes, sir, I did.
I'm gonna show you those 2 documents, sir.
Yes,
Those
sir.
documents you consulted?
Yes, sir, but I was already pretty familiar with those documents because I worked on the state police pay plan, and that's when I became very familiar with those documents.
Okay. And after consulting the information you described,
Yes, sir.
did you submit a travel time sheet that included 24 hours in transit the first 3 days and the last 2 days?
Yes, sir, based on my understanding what the policy was, that's what I submitted.
Okay. And did that get approved?
No, sir, it did not.
We already heard from Colonel Dupree, and we've heard also from Captain Graffia, your 2 supervisors. Did they disapprove that interpretation?
They did. I had a conversation with Captain Graffia, who said he had spoken with Colonel Dupree, and that they had some concerns about charging time while sleeping. And so then I gave him the scenario. I said, I understand that. And I said, so if we're flying to a destination and my flight's delayed for 4 hours, are people to be compensated for that? And he said, well, sure. And I said, now it's delayed 10 hours. Are people to be compensated for that? And he said, well, sure. I said, well, now it's delayed overnight. And he goes, well, no. And I said, well, that's the problem. We don't know what the standard is. It moves. And I said, I don't have a problem with changing it, but I said, I don't know my exact hours now, Captain. And he says, okay. So I submitted another timesheet, and I said, he says, are these the hours you worked? I said, that's just my average hours that I travel. I said, I don't know what they are, but it's less than what we did.
So you then, for the days that you had full days of travel, you just did an average of 12 hours a day?
Yes, sir.
Is it your sworn testimony, sir, that on those days that you were traveling more than 12 hours a day?
I was traveling and working more than 12 hours a day on those days, yes, sir.
Did you argue with Captain Graffia or Colonel Dupree and said, look, I demand to get paid for the 24 hours? Did you accept their interpretation?
No, I was fine with their interpretation. Everybody can interpret policy different. That's the thing about policy. It's how somebody wants to read it and what they want to put it. He's the ultimate authority. When he speaks, that's it. It's what it is. You know, he once told me one time that I can make Sundays into Mondays. And I'm talking about Colonel Dupree. When it comes to policy or it comes to whatever, they make the rules. They can do whatever they want with it. And when they tell me that this is the way it's supposed to be done, then that's the way it's going to be done.
Is that what you did?
That's what I did.
I want you to comment just briefly with these gentlemen. When you said you submitted your average, did you take down or keep a record on an ongoing basis on this 11-day trip? Did you keep a record of when you got up each morning, when you took a shower, when you had breakfast, when you had lunch, where you were, all of that?
No, not initially, of course not, because we thought according to policy, how it read, that that's what the way it is. But I don't approve overtime. I don't get to claim overtime. That's not that I can get. It's a code that the supervisor has to give you, and whatever they say is that's their review of it and what they look at, and you go by what they say and do.
So did you have notes or documents before you had an opportunity to review the IA investigation, let me ask you this, did you get to see the IA investigation and their determination of hours and so forth prior to receiving the Loudermill letter?
No, sir, I don't believe that was anywhere in there.
Did you get to see the gas log? They use gas logs and they use other methods of trying to formulate the timeline. Did you get to see those documents before the IA, before you got the Loudermill letter?
Some of those things we can see, but not everything. And in some of them, we don't know what the correct times are either, because that has to be verified through certain means. So I didn't have access to everything.
And was there also some confusion? How many time zones did you travel through on this trip?
So you travel through, it's confusing because there's Mountain Standard Time and Mountain Daylight Time.
Arizona doesn't have daylight time, isn't that true?
That's correct. And
So
it
you
depends on what
had-
part of the year that you're traveling through.
So you had Central Standard Time, you had Mountain Daylight Time, Mountain Standard Time, Pacific Time.
Yes, sir.
4 different time zones.
It's a lot to keep up with.
And why didn't you make? Well, let me ask you this: had you ever gone on a trip to this magnitude? I know you testified you'd been on trips with Colonel Edmonds and Colonel Dupree and other command staff before, but had you ever been on such an extended driving trip where you traveled across multiple time zones?
On multiple days a year, sir. I have not.
In retrospect, would you, if you ever allowed to go on another one of these trips, you still work in the same department, don't you?
I do, sir. Yes, sir.
And you still you were concerned with body cameras, different types of hardware, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
So, if should you be allowed to go on a trip like this again, would you keep your time a little differently?
I think you would do a lot differently. You would, I think the one thing that was really good about a lot of this was it forced everybody to pay closer attention to the travel regulations that apparently had been violated for quite some time. And sometimes you still have mistakes in them. They still get kicked back. I hear it all the time at the office that according to the new codified procedures, they still say that they all still get kicked back no matter what. They still get no kickback.
Mr. Falcon, we're gonna need to take a 20-minute recess unless there's something real critical to this line.
No, I have, having this opportunity over, I have everything written down, so I'm not gonna miss anything with you.
We'll be at recess for 20 minutes. Okay, we'll come back to order.
Mr. Hyatt, I'm going to show you appellate number 11 in Lobo. You recognize the document, sir?
They are our performance evaluations.
Yes, sir. You can have that.
Yes, sir.
Would you tell me, or would you tell the commission, what was your evaluation in 2016?
Exceptional.
Was there any higher possible evaluation on this rating form?
No, sir, that's the highest.
I'll show you your evaluation for 2015. Would you tell us what your evaluation was in 2015?
Exceptional.
Is there any higher possible rating on the form?
No, sir.
Would you tell us your rating for 2014?
Exceptional.
Is there any higher possible rating on the form?
No, sir.
Now, they changed forms a little bit in in 13. What was your rating, sir?
My rating was outstanding.
Was there any higher possible rating under the system that was outstanding in 2013?
No, sir.
Mr. Hyatt, what was your rating for 2012?
Outstanding.
Is there any higher possible rating in 2012 above outstanding?
No, sir.
Now, you heard, I was surprised, but did you hear Colonel Reeves talk about disciplinary action and disciplinary record as being something he would take into consideration?
I can't remember, sir.
He was talking about Thurman Miller, and he said that he had not had a disciplinary action. He thought that was a significant. And I asked him, did he take into consideration exceptional and outstanding ratings? He said no. Did that surprise you?
It did.
Just to clarify though, in your 20 years as a trooper, have you ever been disciplined before today, before this matter?
I've never been disciplined as a state trooper. And to clarify, what surprised me is that if you look at what's taught in state police under the due process procedure, that's one of the things they look at is past disciplinary records. And an employee performance and what they have done, and not let one incident define an employee.
I'm going to show you, sir, a document I've marked as Exhibit 19. Tell me if you recognize those as documents, sir.
So listing of my awards I received from the department since I became a trooper.
In conjunction with the witness's testimony, I would offer introduce and file felon 19, and I'll hand you back the felon 12.
Ms. Juror?
No objection.
So admitted.
In conjunction with the testimony of Trooper Nesgazinski, there was a statement that Nesgazinski, the original timesheet showed all comp time. Would you tell us about that, sir?
Yes, sir. When Trooper Nesgazinski met Colonel Dupuy at the funeral, Colonel Dupuy made reference to Nesgazinski, maybe you should go to the conference or whatever. He never followed back up with that. Never gotten back in touch with him, never said anything to him. In our conversations with Nesgazinski, he told me that, look, I'm going to go there on vacation anyway. Do you mind if I just catch a ride with y'all if he doesn't allow it? And I said, yeah, that's fine. So it's my understanding, as well as Colonel Dupuy's understanding, that he was there for vacation purposes. Now, once he was there in San Diego, and Colonel Dupuy and Colonel Edmondson saw that he was actually attending some of the conference things, he was actually working. That Saturday, if I remember right, they said he needs to charge his time earlier. And then they made me get him a follow-up with his secretary, Colonel Dupuy, to get him a hotel room.
Because he was living, Bill, he was living with his old partner from San Diego one night, and he stayed with his sister another night, didn't have any accommodations, is that correct?
Well, he told me he was going to be with his parents' house, is what I understood him to say.
I want to back up a little bit to something I just left out of my notes. When y'all visited the Hoover Dam, how long were y'all there?
It was somewhere around maybe an hour. It wasn't really the dam, it was the Mike O'Callaghan, I believe, Pat Tillman Memorial Bridge.
Pat Tillman was a Navy SEAL or something?
He was like an Army Ranger, football player, and died in a line of duty.
And did y'all actually go onto the dam property itself, or did y'all stay in the rest area?
No, it's an interstate, and right off the interstate is a rest area, and we stopped there to use the restroom and see the dam from there.
Now, I wanted to clarify one other thing regarding your supplemental timesheet. other than Monday, and I understand there's an issue about Monday because of the zoo and going down to La Jolla for a total of about 3.5 hours. But other than that, is your timesheet correct and accurate as to the time you actually worked in San Diego, once in San Diego?
Yes, sir. As we got a chance to actually sit there and during the investigation progressed, you actually got a chance to break down the hours, talk to the other people, talk to, after it was over, talk to the lieutenant colonels that were around me during the time, talk to my supervisors that were around me during the time. It was accurate.
Okay. Now, I want to talk about Thurman Miller a little bit. He actually worked in operational development, also assigned operational development?
Yes, sir, he was.
Okay, so you would have been his lieutenant?
I would have been a lieutenant in operational development, yes, sir.
Okay. And were you familiar with work activities of Sergeant Miller in San Diego?
You do keep promoting him. He's just a trooper, but...
Oh, trooper,
yes.
master trooper, that's it.
Yes, sir. For Trooper Thurman Miller, I was aware of his work activities while he was there, as direction I got from Captain Greg Raffia.
Okay, and would you tell us, what was he working on a project in addition to attending the conferences and so forth?
Yes, in our section, it's such a small section, just because we leave doesn't mean our work stops. We're responsible for the work that we have to do.
And did he have an assignment that he was working on while in San Diego?
He had several assignments. He was getting ready for the, if I'm not mistaken, the Legislative Black Caucus Convention. He was in charge of that. He was also in charge of compiling a report that needed to be done for the legislature on scrap metal dealerships and the regulation of scrap metal dealerships.
Right. That was a work in progress, how whether or not scrap metal people were going to be regulated, how they would be regulated, whether they would have cameras, the whole deal.
That's correct, and whether or not they were going to bring legislation to make the state police actually regulate them.
And were you actually aware that he was working on that while he was in San Diego?
That was his job assignment, to have his assignments turned in, yes, sir. Just to clarify, not just in San Diego, throughout the trip.
Now, again for Trooper Miller, there's some discussion about what he did on Friday. He was not registered for the SPOS convention, which was going on Friday. But did you see him, and was he in attendance all day at the SPOS convention?
The conventions of SPOS and S&P kind of run together, if that makes any sense. There's the same thing, they're in the same building, they share the same hallway, same break area. One's in one room and others in another room. During that time, I saw him not only at mine, but in between with the colonels at another event as well.
Colonel Reeves made a big point of the fact, Rodney, that you submitted you emailed your expense statements to Thurman and to Durrell. Would you tell me, sir, or tell this commission how that came about, why you did that, and what was the precursor to doing that? When y'all got back to Baton Rouge, did y'all get together and try and put together a reconciliation of what time you had right then?
No, sir, we didn't. It's common practice for all troopers that go on a group trip or whatever to share their expense accounts, and so that's common practice. It's done throughout the state police. If a mobile field force goes on a mission, they commonly share all of their stuff together and their information together, just to make sure that it's all done correctly.
Is that the reason you did what you did?
I just gave it to them as a go-by. I didn't mandate that they had to do it that way. I didn't require them to do it that way. Never told them that they must do it this way.
And of course, Major Williams didn't follow your time sheet at all as it relates to his hours, is that correct?
That's correct, yes, sir.
He only claimed 8 hours a day.
Yes, sir.
Do you know as a fact that Major Williams spent more than 8 hours a day on the entire trip dedicated to work?
He did, yes, sir. I saw him working on his IA packet. He was constantly he carried like a book bag with him, a knapsack or something that he had, and he would frequently read out of that.
And during the Edmondson administration, were officers required to use double occupancy at a conference?
The under Colonel Dupuy, he told me that there's no way 2 grown men should have to share a bed together or a room together. And it was under his direction that you don't share double occupancy, because he related it to the state travel regulations, which do not require double occupancy.
Rodney, are you familiar with the booklet prepared for captains in part by Colonel Reeves?
Yes, sir, I am.
And have you spent time reviewing that?
Yes, sir, I have.
And there's a section on just cause, isn't there?
There is, yes, sir.
One of the sections talks about, was the investigation fair? Do you believe that the way the investigation progressed, and particularly the way it started after Colonel Edmondson announced the investigation, was fair to you?
I think when you look at due process, and what it talks about is that the 7 criteria have to be met. That when you look at fairness, when you look at the fact that Edmondson orders an investigation on the 18th, tells us that we're going to be disciplined basically in the article. Then on the 20th we get questioned, and the questions are very, very interrogative in nature and very accusatory. And we're not read our rights, and we're not afforded an attorney. I think all of that plays into not being a fair investigation. And then when you tell what happened, and you tell the story, and they learn of, hey, maybe you should have took the most direct route because that's not in the policy state travel guide. Maybe your wife should have signed a waiver form because that's not in the state travel guide. And they learn all this on the 20th, and then they come around and start asking questions again on the 21st, knowing of potential policy violations, and still don't read you your rights, still don't afford you an attorney, not taking into account the police officer's Bill of Rights, not taking into account many of the State Police Commission rules. I think when you look at the totality of everything, the fact that it's brought to a colonel's attention and he refuses to even worry about that part of it is some concern for fairness for a lot of people.
How long did it take them before you got the Loudermill decision? Before the IA completed their investigation, was it months?
Before my final letter, sir?
Before the Loudermill? the Loudermill was, let me get it,
Is that the letter I received July 2nd?
July 2nd, right. This incident happened in October,
Yes, sir.
and we're talking about 9 months.
Yeah, that's a big part of it. So when an investigation, or when they know of an investigation, and in my letter they said in November they knew of something that,
Well, I'm gonna show you that, sir. If you look at you'll go to Exhibit 76, page 7.
yes, sir.
Read the first paragraph, the first line of the second paragraph.
When your reimbursement documents were reviewed prior to release pursuant to a public records request received in November of 2016, questions arose regarding the amounts you claimed for reimbursement for meals.
When the agency receives information regarding a potential violation of rules, does the State Police Commission rules require that they start an investigation at any particular time if there's no complaint, no formal complaint filed?
It says it has to be done within 14 days of their knowledge.
And that would be Rule 1218, is it not?
I'm not sure of the exact rule number.
Well, let me show it to you, because I want you to look at it real carefully. My question to you, sir, is when they charged you in this letter, not only did the public records request occur, but it says very specifically in this letter that there were questions that arose regarding your claim reimbursement. They ultimately investigated you about claim reimbursement, right?
Yes, sir.
Did they do it within 14 days when they first learned of the issue?
No, sir.
Would you read Rule 12.18B?
Mr. Falcon, we're real familiar with those rules and how to count.
I hope so. Thank you, sir.
I mean, you're free to ask whatever question you think you need to ask. I just want to let you know
Did they start an investigation in 14 days of learning of the issue?
No, sir, they didn't. And I think in January of 2017, they told us to recorrect them, and we did that. And apparently they were still wrong, and we didn't get...
Oh, the contention is they're still wrong.
That's correct. And we didn't get or no investigation was started then either.
Now, Rodney, I'm just about finished. You submitted a reimbursement in this matter, is that correct?
Yes, sir, it is.
Okay. And what guidance did you have as to how much you should reimburse?
I didn't have any from the department. I only went off of what I learned from the state travel regulations and taking a most direct route that no one knew about.
And did you try and correct the issue without having to be told to do so?
I did, yes, sir.
That's all the questions I have, Mr. Hine.
Mr. Warfel, you want to keep going now, or do you?
Yeah, we'll take a break. Let us know when, or a little closer as well, when you get to a shifting point.
Okay. Okay, Sergeant Hyatt, I'm sorry, I'm probably gonna jump around because I took a lot of notes and then I have some specific questions I wanna ask.
Yes, ma'am.
But, in your 20 years, you said, as a trooper, you've been assigned to operational development and planning. Is that section also responsible for state police policy?
That section is responsible for state police policy. Wasn't my full 20 years though, but yes, ma'am.
So you referred to section 209.3 that talks about, the DPS, commissioned officers are governed by RS 40, I think it's 2531, is that correct? Do you recall referring
Yes,
to
sir.
that?
Yes, ma'am.
So whose, which section's responsibility would it be for changing policy when laws or rules change? Would that be operational development?
That would be the colonel's responsibility to let us know what he wants done, and that's what we do. But it's our job to review policy, yes, ma'am.
Okay. So let's go to February 20th, when you were asked to meet with Kathy Flincham and David McClendon. During that time that you spent in Major Flincham's office, did you discuss anything besides the trip? Did you discuss any personal matters, any other conversation just besides the trip?
I remember discussing with her certain policy violations from the state travel guide. As far as taking the most direct route, I remember discussing with them policy violation after I had learned and read about everything, went and reviewed it. Having someone who is not a state employee sign a waiver form. I remember discussing that with them. I remember telling them that my times were an average, we just averaged out our times. I remember telling them the general route and how it became, or how it came to be in some of our conversations.
Was the entire time in there about that, or did you have any personal conversations? Did y'all have small talk, or the entire time was strictly about the trip?
I remember my time there, questions about the trip and conversations about how it came to be.
So nothing else? There was no other discussion?
I can't remember, ma'am.
On February 20th, were you ordered by either Major Flincham or Captain McClendon to answer any questions?
So there you go with the order thing again.
Well,
according to policy and procedure, there's a specific guideline in there that says that we shall cooperate with any investigation. Shall. Have to. We have to.
Did they tell you at that point that there was an investigation?
It's my understanding that there was from the newspaper article that we were going to be under investigation.
But I asked you, did they tell you there was an investigation?
No, I knew they was there to ask questions about it.
Did they ever tell you that there would be a penalty for failing to answer any of the questions?
No, ma'am, they did not.
Okay.
I already knew that, though, that there would be. That's what the policy says.
But you're assuming they were conducting an investigation at that time,
They
right?
were conducting an investigation at that time.
That's your assumption. So you said that you read the article, and in connection with the questions you were asked on the 20th and 21st, you said that they asked you questions that could not be answered in a way to cover Colonel Edmondson, and essentially you didn't know how to respond. Did they ask you to tell them anything other than the truth?
The way they asked the question was like they were trying to ask questions as if Colonel Edmondson would have asked them or directed them that these are the type of questions we want to know to determine whether or not, basically to cover him, it seemed like did anybody order you to go to Las Vegas? Well, Colonel Edmondson knew very well where we were the whole time. He called me while I was in Las Vegas, asked me where I was staying at. After we finished the trip and we got down to San Diego, we had dinner that night. The trip was talked about. He asked again. He said the Palazzo was his favorite hotel. It was all discussed and it was all known and it was all talked about. So when you asked the question, did anyone order you to go to Las Vegas? It seems that no one directly ordered me to do that, but he definitely knew that we did that. So that kind of line of questioning just seemed very evasive, or very like, this was it for us. We were the ones that were going to have to. And mind you that you have to take into consideration, I just watched my colonel lie, basically saying that he didn't know that we went on this trip.
But would you agree that in state police, there's a difference between an order to do something and a suggestion to do something?
I don't know if there's a suggestion that ever comes out of the colonel's mouth. He can say he suggested this or he suggested that.
Is there a
That's fine.
penalty for not complying with an order?
I think there's a penalty for not complying with anything in the long term, yes, if that's what you're talking about.
I specifically asked an order, a
If you're
direct
giving
order.
a direct order, there's a penalty for not obeying a direct order. It would be insubordination.
And I guess my question is, you said you felt that they would be trying to put it on you. If the whole trip was open, there was nothing to conceal, what would be put on you? What was your concern that would be put on you?
That's what I was most concerned with. I didn't know where they were going with all of this or what they were doing. I just knew that the questions I would be asked were very directed towards that.
Is it possible they were just trying to figure out what had happened, where the trip had taken you, and what went on?
I think knowing that a state police colonel was not being 100% truthful with the media caused alarm to everybody that's being questioned.
Okay, so you were served with a notice that a formal administrative investigation began, is that correct?
Yes, ma'am, I was.
And then subsequent to that, you were interviewed on March 2nd and March 23rd, and we stipulated that you were read your rights in both of those interviews. In either of those interviews, you did not request to have counsel present, correct?
No, I did not.
You said that you were familiar with the state travel guide, but you weren't familiar with it in toto. I think specifically you said that the policy, the state police policy, refers you to the travel guide for reimbursement, is that correct?
It does.
So you said that was after the fact, guidance after the fact,
And
correct?
that's why I seek questions and consult with both Colonel Dupuy and Colonel Edmondson.
Okay, and on August 9th, 2016, you submitted a travel and training request, is that correct?
That's correct.
And in that, you have to approximate cost, and I'm looking at yours, which is J5, if you'd like to look along with me. That lists the course fee, and it lists meals and a tier and lodging. These are estimates of the trip. How did you know prior to the trip what the estimates would be for meals and lodging without consulting the travel regs?
What number is that, Michelle?
J5.
These are questions that are from reimbursement purposes. So from the reimbursement purposes, it's a tier 3 city that we knew, and it's 12 days.
So
it's tier 3.
if you didn't consult the travel regs till after the fact for reimbursement, how could you have listed that on your travel and training app?
Because that's knowledge of reimbursement. So we knew that for reimbursement purposes, we were going to be claiming a tier 3 city, which is what I claimed here, which shows that I claimed a tier 3 city for all 12 days. And I claimed the tier 3 cost of that city for all 12 days.
So
That's
you
my
would have
estimate.
consulted the travel regs prior to completing this, correct?
When we look at the travel regs, it shows a reimbursement, okay, for reimbursement. I knew that this
understand
was
that.
the reimbursement cost. So yes, I knew. When we get our state travel guide, we know what the reimbursements are. That makes sense, that you file for it. So yes, that's what this is right there. So for all 12 days, I claimed a tier 3 city, and for all 12 days, I claimed a tier 3 lodging for that city as an
And
estimate.
So obviously you looked at the travel regs prior to completing this to know that would have been the tiers,
The
correct?
guide, yes ma'am, the travel guide.
Thank you.
There's two types of them. There's the complete travel guide and there's a pocket guide. So we get the pocket guide. That's what we utilize. It doesn't have all the rules in it at all. It's just a pocket guide on what you can reimburse.
Okay. Is this the guide you're talking about, the state travel regs here?
No ma'am, that's the complete book. We never see that. We only see the pocket guide
And why do you not see this?
because that's the one we use. We utilize the pocket guide. That's what all troopers utilize.
How do you know that's what all troopers utilize versus
So
what
in
you
our
utilize?
knowledge, that's what all troopers have ever utilized was the pocket guide. It's a small compact thing. You go on the website and it's the pocket guide.
So you're saying that the link in the state police policy does not take you to this entire travel guide, it's only to the pocket guide?
I think it takes you to the DOA page that contains the pocket guide. Yes, ma'am.
Is
Division of
only the
Administration
pocket
page.
guide on the DOA's website, or
They
the
have the
entire
full,
travel?
they have the full thing too.
Okay, so it's there for you.
Yes, ma'am.
And did you dispute that this is also promulgated by administrative rules?
That is promulgated. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Do you dispute that this was applicable to you as a state trooper and state employee at the time you took the
It
job?
absolutely is. Yes,
Okay.
ma'am.
All right. So we talked about expense reimbursement, that's contained in 221, and you refer to the form. And even the policy that says all blanks should be filled in. Is it your responsibility to ensure that the blanks are correctly filled in and completely filled in?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, and in the state travel regulations, I can refer you to J11 on page 8, down at the bottom, in paragraph 1. There's a sentence that says, in all cases, the date and hour of departure from and return to domicile must be shown along with each final destination throughout the trip clearly defined on the form.
Yes, ma'am.
What was your interpretation of that if it wasn't to put every place you stopped?
The final destination, we only had one final destination. Each final destination could be a home and San Diego. So that's what we took that to mean. That's what I took that to mean.
We or you?
Well, that's what I've always taken it to mean. Under in the administration, that's how we've always filled them out. And that's how they're being filled out today.
So that's what each meant to you, was, in your opinion, you still only had one final destination?
Yes, ma'am, with San Diego when we set out. We didn't know where we were exactly staying at throughout the trip, except for one location after talking to Colonel Edmondson for sure.
And why would the form have a blank for each and every day if you didn't, and the state police form lists all points traveled? What would be the meaning of that if it wasn't to show every place you stopped along the way?
If that's the meaning of that, and my supervisor would have told me that, I would have filled that out. He knew
Did you ask?
He knew where I was at the hotel. He knew where we were going. He knew where we stayed. He knew about the trip. And if that was the thing, that's what we would have done it. Also on that form too, every blank is not always filled out. They never fill out every time slot.
Well, I'm not talking about everybody, let's talk about what you did.
They never fill out every time slot, because every time slot's a blank. And according to what you're drilling down onto, that means that it has to be filled out that way. And I'm just telling you that the ones that I've seen, the ones that I've always turned in, never were like that. You don't fill out every spot of that everywhere. It's never been done that way.
So if you weren't sure what that meant, did you ever have a discussion with Captain Graffia before you filled it out?
I'm assuming if all my supervisors knew what I was doing and where I had gone and where I had stayed, if they had an issue with it, they would send it back, which they did eventually. And they told me to redo it, and I did.
You didn't answer my question. Did you have a discussion with Captain Graffia before you turned it in? You said that this had never been done before for a conference, this long drive. Did you ever consult with Captain Graffia prior to turning in your expense account as to how to show it on an expense form?
I didn't think he would, if he wanted to talk to me, he would have. I didn't have a discussion with him. I filled it out to the best of my ability and what I thought I could do.
So is it fair to say you did have the travel regulations available to you to complete your expense account at the time you did it?
Ma'am, I just went off of what we generally utilize and what we generally do. If you're trying to say if they were available to me on a website somewhere, then yeah, they were available for everybody on a website somewhere.
Okay, that's what I wanted to know. You referred to the ethics decision. Could I have that copy? I'm going to ask you to read the first paragraph of this letter, and then I'm going to ask you to read before the closing the last paragraph of that letter.
The Louisiana Board of Ethics, in its March 15, 2018 meeting, considered a confidential investigation report regarding a possible violation of Section 1111A of the Code of Governmental Ethics Code in your capacity as a trooper with the Louisiana State Police.
And then if you read that last paragraph before the closing story, please.
You mean based on the totality of circumstances? Or please be aware?
Please be aware.
Please be aware that Louisiana Revised Statute 42-1118 prohibits a public servant from receiving anything of economic value other than compensation of benefits from the governmental entity to which he is duly entitled for the performance of the duties and responsibilities of his office or position.
Would you agree that your disciplinary letter did not charge you with a violation of that provision?
I would disagree with you based on, that's not what I was told with the government ethics. This is a closing letter. The official letter that we got basically said that due to the fact that we claimed overtime, due to the fact of our travel
But
to...
that's not what that says, is it?
No, that's not what this says. So I wouldn't agree with you.
But where in your disciplinary letter were you charged with a violation of this statute?
Of that statute?
Yes.
That's not in our state police policy and procedure.
Okay, thank you. You said that your job was to drive when you got to the conference. Yet all the testimony we heard yesterday, nobody put you on standby or call. The testimony was that your primary job was to attend the conference. Is that correct?
That is what they said, but I know what my job was. I know my job. I'm always the driver, ma'am.
Why would the SPOS registration and the IACP registration have been paid if your primary job was to drive?
I can only tell you that when we went on these trips, that I was typically the driver. I've been on these trips several times. I'm always the guy that drives. I'm always the guy that they call when they need a ride somewhere. I'm always the guy that they call when they need to be transported. That's just what I do. I knew what my role was when I was told that you're going to go to the conference, but you have to drive. And then even in the article, I think Edmondson said that he wanted the car there for transportation.
And how many times were you called during the conference in San Diego to drive?
Only one time.
And when was that?
That was the Sunday.
And did you drive or did Trooper Neskadinsky drive?
So when we were at the event on Saturday, Neskadinsky showed up. Colonel Edmondson requested that I drive him to Torrey Pines. I then turned to Colonel Dupree and I said, because Ski was right there, and I said, well, Neskadinsky's right here, and because they just told him he has to start being paid for being here and stuff, I said, do you mind if I take him along? And he said, no, sir. No, I don't.
I think what you said in your interview to IA was that you recruited Neskadinsky to drive. Would that be correct?
I asked him if he wanted to come along. Yes, ma'am. After direction from Colonel Dupree.
So we know that you testified you didn't know that the travel rate said you had to take the most direct route, but you don't disagree that's what should have been done?
That's absolutely what should have been done.
Was the reason, part of the reason to drive supposedly a cost savings measure?
I don't know.
To have the vehicle there?
I think you're asking them, well, let me object to the form of the question in that it is seeking from
I'll rephrase.
Sergeant Hyatt, Colonel Edmondson's state of mind in giving him the directive to drive.
I'll rephrase. Were you ever told that that you had to drive as a cost savings measure to the department?
I was never told that.
You're about to get into a different line of questions.
I'm all over the place, so if you want to break now, it's not going to mess me up.
All right, let's break now. It's approximately 12 o'clock. Let's come back to 12:30. Apologies for coming back late, but as everyone knows, there were problems in the kitchen here, as well as the kitchen off campus as well.
Sergeant Hyatt, we had heard testimony about the route that was taken, the northern route. So just to be clear, was that your decision to take that route, or are you still maintaining you were ordered by Colonel Edmondson to take that route?
I don't think I ever said I was ordered to take a route by Colonel Edmondson. And just to clarify on the order, I don't think in 20-something years of state police, I don't think anybody's ever told me, I order you to do this, I order you to do that. It's just a general conversation that they have. So in talking to Colonel Edmondson that morning, that was the general conversation that was had. That's what he approved and authorized.
Okay, so it was finally it was your decision to take that route, right?
Objection argumentative.
Well, we're trying to figure out how the route was determined. I know Colonel Edmondson said it was suggested, it was discussed, but the ultimate decision of how to travel there, we're trying to find out whose decision that was.
He can answer the question of whose decision it was.
So when I had that conversation with Colonel Edmondson that morning, he obviously said, do not take I-10, and then that route was discussed, and he agreed that that route was okay to do that. That in the conversation that we had with him, that was his determination that everything he was approved to be on that route. That was my understanding of our conversation.
And are you the one who started driving the morning of October 10th?
I was the one who started driving, yes ma'am.
And you started driving towards that northern route, correct?
Yes ma'am, based on my discussion with Colonel Edmondson.
You had testified that it wouldn't be feasible to plan in advance where you were going to stay and all that. At some point in time, obviously, you said you considered different routes. Is that correct?
We did consider different routes, yes ma'am.
And why wouldn't it have been feasible to plan for where you were going to stop along the way?
In my discussions with Colonel Dupuy, it was decided that we would just try to drive it along. We wasn't sure of where we were going to be staying at each night, except for the one location that I did pre-hold some rooms for after my conversation with Colonel Edmondson that morning, which was Las Vegas. But in talking to him, we would drive until we got tired, and then we would try to find a place to stay. That was just the determination we made with the colonels.
Was there anything that prevented you from planning stops along the way and where you would stay?
No, ma'am. I guess not. In just looking at things in general, there wouldn't have been anything that prevented me from planning.
When you left on the morning of October 10th, did you know that the Grand Canyon was going to be one of the places you were going to stay?
That was going to be one of the stops, yes ma'am, I did know that. And in getting there and driving there, I did not realize the remoteness of it. Like I said, when we're talking about this trip in the morning time, it was a westward travel, and those things existed going west, if that makes any sense. So those were lined up in just in general talk, that those items and those things, Grand Canyon, Hoover Dam, Las Vegas, were in a westward direction towards San Diego.
So if you weren't sure what route to take, there were different routes, why did you not have a discussion with Edmondson prior to the morning of October 10th?
I did, ma'am. I did.
When was that?
It was probably a month before we might have left, or a few weeks before we left. I talked to Colonel Dupuy about the routes, and we had discussed some options. Like I said, people kept coming into the vehicle and out of the vehicle. Up until that thing, I think Colonel Edmondson, I think he thought that Greg Raffia and Jason Starnes might have been in the vehicle with me at that time. I'm not sure.
I'm sorry, I asked you about the route.
So we asked the colonel directly about the route, and that's when he told us the first time, don't take I-10.
Edmondson?
Yes,
and
ma'am.
when was that?
It's a couple of weeks before we would have left.
Okay, so a couple of weeks before you knew you weren't going to take I-10 there, correct? Because Colonel Edmondson said that.
I didn't know that I was not going to take it. That's what he said. Yes, ma'am. Don't take I-10. But I was still having conversations with Colonel Dupuy over routes and options, and which was part of the reason why we were there that morning.
So
from the 10th.
So what you said is 2 weeks before Colonel Edmondson said don't take I-10.
I didn't know approximate time, but I know it was before we left. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, but on the morning of the 10th, you still weren't sure what route to take. Is that what you said?
We wasn't sure what route we were going to take, and Colonel Edmondson once again reaffirmed, don't take I-10.
But in the 2 weeks, you didn't plan any lodging along the way, knowing you weren't going to take I-10. Is that correct?
No lodging was planned because in discussions with Colonel Dupuy, it was we would drive until we got tired, and then we would find some place to stay.
said y'all planned to leave that morning around 7, and you left your house in Prairieville at 6. How long does it take for you to get to State Police Headquarters?
It's approximately 30 minutes, ma'am.
Okay. And what time, you said you met the colonel at the cafeteria, what time does he usually get there?
I'm trying to remember. I don't remember what time it was that morning. I know that Colonel Dupree is the one who told me to go meet him at the cafeteria because I had to get his car. I knew I had to go fill it up. That was all part of the plan. That's why I left early. I knew I had to put my gear and stuff in the vehicle, things of that nature, get it ready, and get everybody else packed into it, which is why I was there early. The plan was to leave 4-7. So in talking to Colonel Dupree, he said, come to the cafeteria. And then he told me, I'm not leaving until I speak to Colonel Edmondson.
And do you recall what time you met in the cafeteria with Colonel Edmondson?
I can't remember. I know it was during breakfast time, ma'am. Matter of fact, I called Darrell around 7 o'clock that morning to tell him that where we were at, and that that's why I wasn't by the vehicle. And he said, I'm going to finish up some work over here. I already ate breakfast.
So do you recall doing anything else that morning at headquarters before you left?
I know we filled the vehicle up.
Did you work out at the State Police gym?
No, ma'am, I did not.
You did not? You testified that you were getting instructions along the way from the command staff. What did you mean by that? What instructions were you getting?
They would ask questions. They were the ones calling me, wanting to know where we were. I guess the instructions would be send the boss photos to, take pictures at every state line. Where are y'all staying? We would fill them in on where we were staying. They would say, okay.
But that's providing information. When you said you were getting instructions, what instructions were you getting? Did they instruct you to go to the Grand Canyon or to go to Las Vegas?
Just that morning.
And they instructed you to do that?
That was the route that was authorized and approved by Colonel Edmondson, yes, ma'am.
And Edmondson specifically said, go to Grand Canyon and go to Las Vegas. Is that what you're saying?
Ma'am, if you're asking, did Colonel Edmondson say, you will go to the Grand Canyon, you will go to Las Vegas? And no, he did not say that.
Okay. You said that there was never any attempt to conceal any part of this trip, but you mentioned that Colonel Edmondson made a comment about your wife posting something on Facebook.
Yes, ma'am.
Why would he say that if there was no reason to conceal anything on the trip?
I think that's a question you'd have to ask Colonel Edmondson.
So I believe you also testified that the afternoon sometime, according to your call log, Colonel Edmondson and you spoke when you were in Las Vegas. You told him you were at the Palazzo, and once again he said, hurry up and get there. Is that correct?
He called me while I was at the Palazzo. It was around 4:20 something. I was up in the room. He asked, where are y'all staying? I said, we're at the Palazzo. He then said, doesn't your conference start tomorrow? I said, yes, sir, it does. I'm going to be late to it. He says, all right, you need to hurry up and get to get to San Diego.
Did you tell any of your fellow travelers after that phone call that night that Edmondson had said, hurry up and get to Las Vegas?
I did indeed, yes.
That night?
Now, I don't know if it was that night. I know I was telling them in the morning time to get people motivated, we got to go, so yes.
But not, you said yes, but you said not that night, correct?
I can't remember exactly. I know I remember saying it.
With regards to you saying Colonel Edmondson that night when you were in Las Vegas you told him that you were at the Palazzo and that you were going to be late the next morning. And he said, that's all right, just hurry up and get to Vegas, I believe.
Get to San Diego.
San Diego. On March 23rd, when you were interviewed by Internal Affairs, you were asked twice if there was any discussion about you missing the first part of SPOS, and both times you said no, that it was your intention to get there. Why did you not tell him then that Colonel Edmondson told you it was okay to be late?
During the investigative section, or when you're being asked specific questions, obviously you're not going to remember everything at each and every time. It just doesn't happen. That coupled with the fact that you're not allowed to talk to anybody about the investigation while it's ongoing, except for Colonel Edmondson is the only one, and his designee, which would be at that time Major McClendon. That's the only person you're allowed to talk to. It wasn't until after the fact that we were able to speak to each other, and we was actually able to speak to my wife. And as you're talking about it, or as you remember things, your memory gets refreshed. It's quite often is why when you give an interview, or when someone gives an interview, you give them a card and said, if you think of anything else, give me a call, because a lot of times those kind of conversations do spark memories that do occur. And for me, that's how it works.
And did IA not ask you if you had anything to add at any time?
They did. They did. They asked me that quite often.
So during the investigative process, or even after, you never advised IA of that conversation with Colonel Edmondson?
I advised them of a lot of things during the whole process. I can't remember everything that we've ever talked about. It could have come up, it could have not come up.
And you brought up the fact that Marty Schaubert, we even stipulated that Marty had mentioned possibly getting comped rooms in Las Vegas. And do you recall Mr. Schaubert calling you on Monday evening and telling you he couldn't get you a comp room, but he could get a casino rate? Do you recall that?
I don't remember our exact conversation. He called me like 3 or 4 times. He gave me a guy's number to a hotel. I believe his name was Andy, is what I had in my logs. And that was the extent of the conversation with him that I remember.
Do you recall telling Mr. Schaubert at that time on Monday afternoon that it was too late, you had already made your reservation and it would cost more to cancel it?
I remember holding the rooms on that evening. I do remember that. Like booking the rooms or reservations to hold the rooms. I don't remember the exact or the specific conversation I had with Marty.
Okay, so if Mr. Schaubert would have come testify that that's what you told him, you had already booked your room online and it would cost more to cancel it, would you dispute that?
I'm not one to dispute whatever he would have to say.
Did you use Booking.com for the Las Vegas reservation?
I'm trying to remember if I initially did that for that one. I'm not 100% sure. I want to say that that is probably what I would have done, but I'm not 100% sure.
And if you're familiar with Booking.com, sometimes when you make a late reservation for a popular attraction, you might have to prepay that room. Did you have to prepay these rooms?
I have no idea how that works.
Was your hold on the rooms at Las Vegas refundable or non-refundable?
I can't remember that either. I didn't think that. I thought I could refund my money is our anticipation of it.
And Grand Canyon, as I appreciate it, is a national park, correct?
It is.
With limited lodging, is that correct?
They have 2 or 3 lodges, several rooms there. Yes, ma'am.
You mentioned that you went to the Bright Angel Lodge to see if there was any availability there, correct?
That's one of them. They're all connected. There's 2 of them that are connected to each other.
Did you spend any time at the Bright Angel Lodge doing anything else?
The whole rim and the way it's set up is the lodges are all connected around the rim. So we spent time going to each one. I think it was kind of cool up there, so they went to the gift shop to get a jacket, some of the people. I know we got a snack while we were there, and we looked at the Grand Canyon and took pictures and sent them to Edmondson and Dupuy and all.
Did you ever consider when you found your lodging there, I think ultimately y'all stayed at Holiday Inn Express?
Yes, ma'am.
When you looked for lodging there, did you ever consider any other places, perhaps traveling on? I look at the map up there and it looks like at the Grand Canyon you can go straight down.
That's about over an hour drive, yes, ma'am.
Okay, what time did you check in?
It was around 8 o'clock in the evening.
And then also, if you had taken that route down towards Phoenix, not necessarily to Phoenix, but towards Phoenix, looks like you could have continued back down to, I believe that's I-10 to get over to San Diego. Did y'all ever consider that?
There's probably a lot of things we could have done, ma'am, in hindsight, and that all sounds great, but when you just drive 19 hours, or you're up for 19 hours the previous day, and you don't get very much sleep, the decision was that we were pretty tired at that point, and we could have drove on, but there's nothing really around that area that I saw when we were looking for hotel rooms.
Okay, so I'm glad you brought that up. I'm gonna reference that in procedural order number 201.
Is that exhibit number?
I'm trying to find it for you one second. I believe it's 80, J80. If you look at, I believe it's section 4, approval of time, VIII on page 14.
Yes, ma'am.
Can you read that section for us?
You said VII at the very bottom?
VIII. I think it starts officers, civilians.
Are you looking at the old one?
Yeah.
The old I mean, the new policy instead of the old policy?
I've got to find it. Just a second.
13.
Yeah.
Okay. Section 4, accrual of time, VIII. It's actually on page 13 of this version. Did you find it?
That would be on page 13 in this book.
Yes.
Yes, ma'am.
Can you read that for us?
I can. Officers/civilians shall not work more than a total of 16 cumulative hours without having a rest period of 8 consecutive hours off duty. An 8-hour rest period shall be required following 16 cumulative hours of work before returning to regular duty or an overtime assignment. Exceptions to the 16-hour rule require the approval of the troop section commander or his designee. Cumulative hours are defined as any combination of regular work hours and our overtime details.
So you just said you traveled how many hours?
It's like 19 hours that day, yes, ma'am.
Okay, did you have an 8-hour rest period?
No, ma'am. In my conversation with Colonel Dupuy, he had signed off on the fact that we would drive until we became fatigued or tired, and then we could find a place.
Did y'all have a discussion as to whether or not you could exceed the 16 cumulative hours?
No, ma'am. It was understood in our conversation that I could,
How was that understood?
because I can drive until we became fatigued, and then we would take a break.
And y'all specifically had the conversation about, did the 16 hours come up in your conversation?
No, ma'am.
You testified that you submitted reimbursement to the department on your own without anyone telling you what amount to submit for the reimbursement. Do you recall what day you made that reimbursement?
Was it in May? I'm not 100% sure. I think it's in the log here somewhere in the book.
We'll look at it. Exhibit 54, please.
March 24th.
And And weren't you interviewed by IA on the 23rd?
I'm not sure the exact date, but that's what it's stipulated to be, yes, ma'am.
And so the investigation would have been ongoing at the time you submitted that reimbursement?
This investigation would have been, yes, ma'am.
And do you know what day Colonel Reeves took over as superintendent?
I think y'all said March 24th,
Okay, so that was the same day, correct?
according to testimony, I believe so, yes, ma'am.
So you said that you knew Colonel Reeves wouldn't tolerate this kind of stuff. How would you have known that if he had just taken over as superintendent?
That's what he testified to earlier.
Is that what was on your mind when you made the reimbursement?
No, I made the reimbursement because it was the right thing to do.
I'm going to ask you to flip to J38. That's your initial timesheet.
Yes, ma'am.
And I see out in the comment section it has IACP special detail, and then next to it it says no lunch. What does that mean?
That's the travel hours from work to work. To sometimes it depends on, like I said, I think it was testified to earlier that everybody has a way to fill out a timesheet, and auditors will always come back with a different thing of what you need to fill out. So when you're in travel status, lunch would be included in your travel status, is my understanding of it, and therefore the hours you work, instead of them coming back and saying, oh wait, you didn't account for a 30-minute lunch, it would be the whole time.
And where do you find that in policy? That in your travel, you don't have to deduct for meals?
I thought that was standard procedure for all troopers. That's how we follow it.
Specifically when you're traveling?
That's my understanding of it, yes ma'am, that was always my understanding of it.
You referenced the FLSA that talks about bona fide meal periods not being compensatory time. I mean, you referenced the
Specifically
FLSA.
during travel, they do comment on something to that effect, I believe.
Okay.
That meal periods during travel, and I don't even know if, I want to say that under statewide policy number 2, it may comment on it as well.
It does, in fact. Designated meal periods are not considered work time, and employees are not allowed to work during the scheduled meal period. If a non-exempt employee is required or authorized to work through the designated meal period, overtime compensation at the appropriate rate is required under the FLSA. That's specifically PPM 2, page 4, section 7.
What is this exhibit number?
It is exhibit 40. Oh, I'm sorry. That's Mr. Falcon's exhibit number 40.
I
He
didn't
doesn't
have
have
an
40
exhibit number
exhibits.
40.
The copy you gave me, I'm trying to find it in the record.
4, okay.
Statement, you need mention.
Yeah. You have the exhibit number?
I think it was 40 when we did the motion.
Yeah, so it's your 4. So if I remember correctly, we stipulated that on the first day y'all stopped and ate at Hooters. Is that correct?
I don't think so, ma'am.
Or, I'm sorry, Wingstop. Y'all stopped in Shreveport and ate at Wingstop.
I believe so.
Okay, so did you not have a meal period? Did you eat in the car?
Ma'am, during travel, that you do not take time off during travel. No one takes time off during travel. I've never heard of anybody taking time off during travel. Your time runs continuously while you're in travel status.
So that's your interpretation
I
of it.
think if you let me read some of these rules, I think you can pick it out in them.
I just read one of them. Let's see, we'll go to 201.
I just want to be clear though, in none of my letters did it ever say something about not claiming a meal period or claiming a meal period, because I'd be more than prepared to have something for you if that was the case.
Well, you're just claiming that on your timesheet it says no lunch, but we have a lunch period established there according to the stipulations. Y'all
We have
did
a dinner
stop at
period, we have
lunch.
a breakfast period. We have never, no state trooper that I can think of, when we fill these things out, has ever taken their time out during a travel status.
And I'm asking that because you're talking about PPM2 applying, and it talks about bona fide meal periods. So that's what I'm concerned about, is we're applying pieces of it and not the
No.
whole thing.
Wait, now we're just having a conversation. I need to go back to question and answer. It
Okay,
needs to make sense for all of us here.
thank you. We also refer to PPM number 2, and I'm gonna ask you to look at page 5.
What number is it now?
It is, could I get number 4? On page 5, section 2, conference travel. You read the section, the first part that says approved travel to and from a conference shall be when attendance is required. Colonel Edmondson testified that y'all were not required to attend the conference. You were asked if you wanted to attend and you accepted. Can you read the second paragraph for us?
Your Honor, this is argumentative. We've been through it multiple times.
I'm not your honor.
Oh, excuse me, Mr. Chairman. Objection. It's duplicative, it's repetitive. We've been through it over and over again. She wants to say that when somebody tells you you need to do something, that's not an order, it's a request. I mean, I think y'all got that clear. Whatever way y'all gonna decide, you have plenty of information to decide that.
We're trying to figure out what rules apply here. They're arguing that PPM2 applies, and it talks about conference travel and in transit, and that's what we're trying to establish. He gave his interpretation of the policy, but let's see what the policy really says.
Well, you can only ask him what the policy says. He's the witness on the
That's what
stand
I
right
just
now.
asked
You
him
need to
to
ask
read.
someone else for a different interpretation.
So I want to read what the policy talks about for non-mandatory conferences and claiming time. That's the second paragraph.
So what's the question on the first one?
I want you to read the second paragraph of number 2 on conference travel.
You want me to read a second paragraph, is the question? Yes, ma'am. Travel beyond regular work hours to and from a non-mandatory conference, convention, seminar, workshop, training, course, or related activity elected by the employee shall not be designated as hours worked for which compensation is required or permitted.
Thank you. You testified that you were familiar with Trooper Miller's activity in San Diego. Were you with him the entire time that you were in San Diego?
I was not with him the entire time while I was in San Diego, no ma'am.
Did he provide you with any kind of detailed accounting of what he did during the hours he claimed to have worked on his
We talk
timesheet?
about what they're doing throughout. Where you going? What's the colonel have you doing? Or they would come to me and tell me, Colonel Edmondson needs me to go here, or I'm going with him over here, or I'm going with Charlie Dupree over here.
Was that provided with his timesheet?
No ma'am, that was in discussions.
And were you with Darrell Williams at all times in San Diego?
No ma'am, we were not together the entire time.
And one thing you commented on was a February 18th article that you said it became clear to you that y'all were going to be disciplined. How would you know that if the investigation hadn't occurred yet?
Because that's what the article said. I knew that the colonel was trying to cover up whatever he had said before. And his cover-up of whatever he said before is that there was going to be an investigation that could result in disciplinary action.
Could result in disciplinary measures is what it
Yes.
said. So how do you know that unless you conduct an investigation?
Well, After the question that was asked to us on the 20th and the 21st, there was no doubt of what was about to take place.
You're familiar with policy, are you familiar with all the findings that can result from an internal affairs investigation?
I'm familiar with everything and how a policy can be interpreted and how you can mold policy the way they want to mold policy.
Are there findings other than sustained that can result from an internal affairs
Yeah,
investigation?
there are.
I'm going to ask you to look at page exhibit 62.
Couldn't hear you.
Exhibit 62.
Yes, ma'am.
Is that in fact the voluntary extension letter that you signed on April 21st, 2017?
Yes, ma'am, I believe we stipulated to.
And what does that first sentence say?
It says, I hereby acknowledge that on 2/22 of 2017, the Office of State Police began an administrative investigation into alleged allegations that I violated Louisiana State Police policies and procedures, which case is assigned to IA number 17-006.
Okay. Did you have any other case number assigned to you for an IA investigation at the time?
Ma'am, I've never been investigated before this.
Okay, so you had no other notices of an investigation at that time?
No, ma'am.
I'm going to ask you to look back at PPM number 2. And specifically the part,
When you say PPM.
That is your-
The statewide policy.
yes, the statewide personnel policy number 2, the exhibit 4. Down at the bottom of page 4, number 9, it talks about overtime for travel. I'm going to ask you to read that section.
So while on authorized travel
Yes,
status?
that's correct.
While on authorized travel status for official state business purposes, overtime compensation at the appropriate rate is required for the reasonable and necessary time spent outside of regular work hours in transit to and from the destination.
When you traveled to the Grand Canyon and you traveled to Las Vegas, was that for any official state business purpose?
To and from my destination would be San Diego, California, which was for the official state purpose.
Did you have to go to the Grand Canyon and did you have to go to Las Vegas to get to San Diego?
I guess I didn't have to do anything if we didn't want to.
Was it reasonable and necessary to spend the time traveling to the Grand Canyon or Las Vegas to get to your destination of San Diego?
Is that a question for me or Colonel Edmondson, who approved it?
Well, I'm asking you.
I would think that it would not be reasonable or necessary.
And so when you submitted your revised timesheet to Captain Graffia, didn't it still include time for your travel to the Grand Canyon in Las Vegas?
It did include my time in travel, yes ma'am.
Sergeant Hyatt, you've traveled for the state before, is that correct?
I have traveled, yes, ma'am.
Have you ever flown on state business before?
I have, yes, ma'am.
And how did you book your airfare?
You book it through Short's Travel Agency, I believe,
And how did you know to do that?
because that's what I was told to do when I submit my request to book your airfare through Short's Travel Agency. That's what my supervisor told me to do.
Isn't that contained in the state travel regs?
I'm pretty sure it is. After I read it, it is.
And how would you know how to contact Shorts?
I contacted Mary Van Valkenburg, who has an account, and that's usually who books our flights for us.
Have you ever arranged your own lodging for state business?
Most of the time I'm traveling with the colonels who direct me on where I'm staying. I'm sure there's been times when I did arrange my own lodging. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Would you have referred to the travel regs to arrange that lodging?
No, ma'am, I don't believe we ever refer to the travel regs for the lodging. Most of the time it's at the conference hotel, which we just booked the conference hotel.
After you submitted your revised expense account, did you have to again revise it? When you submitted the revised one in January, did you have to revise it again?
I chose to revise it again, yes, ma'am.
Well, when Captain Graffia told you to revise it and show all the points traveled, you submitted those revisions, correct?
I did as I was directed and instructed, yes, ma'am.
Was it determined that there was anything else that was incorrect with regards to that, specifically Deming, New Mexico?
Nobody referred me to anything else that was wrong, no, ma'am.
You didn't have to revise it to show that Deming was a Tier 2 city?
If I did, I can't remember. I did whatever they told me to do.
You testified that you had emailed a gentleman with SPOs about you arriving at the conference, is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
I'm going to show you a document and ask you to identify that. Is that the email that you sent?
Yes, ma'am, that is. That's
And
Andre.
who is that addressed to?
That's to Andre with SPOs. He's the chairman.
And what is the date of that email?
October the 12th, 2016.
And where were you then?
That would be in Las Vegas.
And would you read on October 12th what Andre sent to you about the events for SPOs tomorrow?
For tomorrow morning, all events will be at the Omni. Please see the below conference assignments.
Okay, and does it mention where lunch is going to be?
It says breakfast/lunch gallery 1, meetings gallery 1, breakfast/lunch gallery 2, breakfast, meetings, lunch.
And what did you tell Mr. Swinnerton in response to his email at the top?
I said, I just said, thanks, Andre, I'll be arriving sometime after lunch, but we'll be there.
In connection with the witness's testimony, I'd like to offer, introduce, and file into the record what would be GPS Exhibit 8, I believe.
No objection.
Thank you, so admitted.
That's all the questions I have, thank you.
We'll do, I'm just putting it in first.
Oh, I do have copies.
Mr. Hyatt, or Sergeant Hyatt, Ms. Gerard questioned you about the ethics committee. Was the ethics committee investigation about whether you got money from the government that you were not entitled to for lunches, overtime, travel?
That's what the investigation concluded. It included pretty much everything that I was charged with state police.
Okay, so although you weren't charged with a specific violation of the ethics statute by the colonel, or by Colonel Reeves, or Colonel Noel in this matter, that was the scope of the Ethics Commission investigation, was it not?
That's correct. All of my timesheets, hotel lodging overages, the side trip itself to the Grand Canyon to Las Vegas, all that was included into the ethics investigation.
What did you consider your final destination, sir, at all times? And what do you consider your final destination? The words final destination, what does that mean to you?
It's where we're going in the end. It always has been San Diego.
Yes, sir. Now, we had, I want to clear up one other thing that I think I'm tired of thinking about it, but this go to the conference and you need to drive, was that a request, a directive, or were you saying, if you feel like it, you can do that?
It was asked to me if I wanted to go to the conference. I said, yes, if you have to go, you have to drive. You have to drive. If you go, you have to drive. I said, yes, sir.
Did you believe your attendance was just absolutely discretionary on your part, or is that the colonel wanted you to go to the conference?
Going to the conference, the colonel wanted us to go on the trip. I went on the trip towards the conference. I don't know what else to say about that.
Okay. And one final question. You, on cross-examination, you questioned extensively about personnel, statewide personnel policy number 2. You have that in front of you?
Yes, sir, I do.
Would you turn to page 7?
Yes, sir.
I want to refer you to Roman numeral 13, the second paragraph. Roman numeral 13 applies to what?
Compensation disputes.
Okay. And would you read the second paragraph out loud?
In the event an employee is inadvertently overpaid wages, the state has the right and duty to recoup any and all such funds without the necessity of any action other than prior notification to the employee of the amount paid in error. The employee will be notified of the discrepancy, and a method of recovering the funds will be determined by the appointing authority in consultation with the employee and the Office of State Human Capital Management. Outstanding debts may be turned over to the Office of Debt Recovery and the Attorney General's Office for collection. 3
questions. Did you ever receive notification of the amount paid in error?
No, sir.
Nevertheless, you made a reimbursement, did you not?
Yes, sir, I did.
Were you ever notified of a discrepancy or method of recovery of funds that will be determined by the appointing authority?
No, sir.
Did they ever have to notify you what you had to do?
No, sir.
And finally, were you ever contacted by the Attorney General's office and enforcement or collection efforts instituted against you?
No, sir.
In fact, sir, did anybody ever complain or suggest that you should have reimbursed more?
No, sir.
Thank you. That's all the questions I have.
Commissioners?
I got some questions. Sergeant Hyatt, how are you?
Well,
All right. Bear with me because I took a lot of notes. I'll make sure I get this right. The officer's bill of rights seems to be a key element of this case, and the investigation was not conducted in a timely fashion. I just want to know from you, when you were questioned on February 20th and 21st, did you feel that your rights were being violated by Major Clinton and Captain Clinton?
I felt that we were being interrogated. I felt that that I knew we were entitled to certain rights. I wanted to do my best to cooperate with the investigation. Like I said before, I just had the Colonel of State Police go on the air and basically say in the media that he had no idea about this trip. And we were trying to figure out what to exactly say and do during these things. So we were scared at that time. I was scared at that time. And I did the best I could to cooperate with the investigation during that time, knowing that there are certain things that should have been followed and should have been done.
During your testimony, you said something, correct me if I'm right, you felt that you were going to be a scapegoat for this San Diego trip, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
So you did feel uncomfortable.
Yes,
Did
sir.
you say that to him during your interview on the 20th and 21st of February?
I'm just trying to make everybody happy at this point in time and hoping and praying that nothing bad comes to me by cooperating.
So you didn't voice any of that during the time of those 2 interviews, correct? That you were worried or scared that you were gonna be the scapegoat? You didn't tell them that, though?
I told them something to the effect of I was worried, I was scared.
Okay. You sent an appeal letter to Colonel Reeves after you disciplined? Did you send Colonel Reeves a letter?
Yes, a response letter.
To a response to your discipline. During that appeal letter, did you mention anything about that you felt the investigation was unfair and that you were singled out and you felt like you were a scapegoat for this investigation?
No, during that appeal letter, that was just to answer, that's a legal letter just to answer the charges. Hopefully, in a meeting with him, that all that would have been revealed and discussed, just as he admitted that they had told him in the beginning that they had issues with it.
Another question. During your trip, I know it was a long trip, and I know there's been some discussion about what route you should have took or shouldn't have took. Colonel Dupuy came testify. He told you that he would suggest you take the most direct route. Colonel Edmondson said, almost you're implying that he said, don't take the I-10 route, which would have been the route that Dupuy suggested. So therefore, Colonel Edmondson, of course, is higher rank than Dupuy, so you felt necessary that you better take the northern route. Is that correct?
That is, in discussions with him, yes, I'm gonna go with what the colonel says.
And later you found out through policy, through the travel policy, that it did say you needed to take the most direct route, correct?
Yes, sir.
So as part of the policy, is not knowing the policy an excuse for violating such policy?
I think that a manual, if you look at the State Police Policy and Procedure Manual, which is the manual we abide by, that's the manual we go by. There is nothing in that manual that references the state travel guide for direct travel, for traveling before. It's only for reimbursement purposes. So everything that I've been charged with is a portion of the Louisiana State Policy and Procedure, not technically the Louisiana Travel Guide and not knowing the most direct route, even though that is a mention in it. I would also add to that, that when a policy manual tells you that you should be trained in a policy, and that a policy and any type of training that you do have in policy makes you a better employee or a better trained employee or a more knowledgeable employee, then you should exercise that.
I'm confused. I just want to make sure. When did you actually know that you were taking the northern route? When, is it 2 weeks? Was that your testimony or no?
The morning that we left, after my conversation with Colonel Dupuy, Colonel Dupuy was there with us, Colonel Edmondson in the cafeteria, that's when I knew the route we were taking. After having a conversation with him and him mentioning and talking about taking the northern route so you can see the mountains in the Grand Canyon, that we mentioned going that way, you can see the Grand Canyon. There was things to see, that was part of the conversation, like the Grand Canyon, like the Hoover Dam, like Las Vegas.
Let's talk about the travel, the final destination. There's been some interpretation. I guess interpretation is all up to the reader of the policy or the rules and regulations set forth. You traveled across 5 days or 10 days across country. You knew or didn't know where you were going to stay at the time. Where's my question? I'm sorry, I lost my point. Your final destination, or your destination, let's not say final, your destination on the end of travels of day one was where? Where did y'all sleep for the night?
We slept in Amarillo on our first day.
Okay, once you slept in Amarillo, could you have determined that to be your tier 4 claiming meals at Amarillo?
When you say, could you have done it, we could have done a lot of things.
Your destination was Amarillo that night. That was your destination to sleep, correct?
That was not my destination to sleep. We didn't know until very late where our destination to sleep was. That's the one we picked.
But you ended up in Amarillo, correct?
I ended up in Amarillo.
Did you ever think or consider to use Amarillo as a tier for claiming your meals for that night or that day?
Not based on my understanding of the travel policy.
If you left Amarillo and traveled, where was your next stop? I don't have it in front of me. I don't know where the next stop was.
Our next stop was the Grand Canyon area.
All right, Grand Canyon. And did you look to use those tiers at the Grand Canyon? Is that a destination stop?
We didn't look to use any tiers or anything other than what our final destination was, which was San Diego, throughout any of the trip going there.
Do you feel that you earned that money that you returned to the state, the $1,300? Do you feel you personally deserve that money, that you worked for that money?
I feel that it was the right thing to do, to pay that money back based on the totality of the circumstances and what we've come to learn from this, and what we've come to know from this. Regardless of whether or not a colonel approves something, regardless of whether or not you keep in touch with him and he knows the whole route, it doesn't make it right. And I paid that money back because it was the right thing to do.
Would you earn that money if you were traveling, you were told to travel? If you were testifying that Colonel Edmondson told you to take that route and you traveled those hours, then you earned that money, so you should have been able to keep it, correct?
You did earn that money, yes.
Just like I believe Lieutenant Williams, Major at the time, he claimed 8 hours. He could have claimed more, couldn't he? And he could have earned that time, is that correct?
That's correct.
So anytime you work or you earn, you should be able to keep that money. There's no reason to return that money if you actually earned that money, correct?
The things that we returned were for the things that were considered to be off route. So if you look at what was considered to be off route, it would have been about 300 miles. The distance it takes to drive 300 miles would have been the off route things. The places you stayed would have been the off route locations. The things you did, what is considered to be off route or what they considered to be off route, was what was recompensated back.
Who was your supervisor at the time of all this?
Greg Raffia was my supervisor that also answered to Lieutenant Colonel Charlie Dupuy.
So Graffia was aware that you were not going to make the conference on time. You contacted Lieutenant Graffia. I know I heard your testimony. You said you contacted Edmondson, Colonel Edmondson. He knew, but then
He had contacted me and we had a discussion on it, but no, Greg Raffia did not know that I was going to be running late for that conference. No, he did not.
and the reason that you were late for the conference is why?
I would say that it was a gross miscalculation of timing to get there, to do other things. That's on me. I should have been a better planner when it came to that, but that's a mistake that I made. And I told the investigators that during the interviews, during the internal affairs interviews. I've never changed that.
I have no further questions.
Mr. Hyatt,
Yes.
you seem to me, sitting up here, as you've been testifying all day, be a very articulate, very well-studied individual. I mean that sincerely. With that in mind, knowing that I'm not an attorney, so I'm not going to sit here and say on your first interview or your first interrogation or your second interview, your second interrogation, I'm just going to call them meetings. Okay, your first meeting on the 20th.
Yes, sir.
Okay. During that, you know policy and procedure. You just testified that you knew you were entitled to certain things. You were scared. You had heard certain things from Colonel Edmondson. With all that in mind, did you ever ask those that you were having the meeting with, from IA, did you ever ask them to stop? I want a lawyer.
No, I didn't want to rock a boat. I thought this was, Colonel Edmondson was ordering this. Colonel Edmondson had known if I seemed like I was rocking a boat, if I seemed like I was going against Colonel Edmondson, I couldn't imagine what was going to happen then.
Did you ever specifically ask them if you were being investigated?
No, sir, I did not.
See, for me, it's just, I'm trying to wrap my head around this.
Yes, sir.
As articulate, well-studied, intelligent as you are. You've been in state police for how long? 20 years?
20 years.
It just seems to me that you knew the policy and procedure and what you were entitled to. As a matter of fact, you testified to it earlier. You knew what you were entitled to have, but you never stopped the process if you were worried or scared. And again, the same question for the following day on the 21st. You just testified that certainly by this time, your radar's up. You know that or you feel though that maybe something's not right here?
Yes, sir.
Okay, again, am I correct in saying you didn't stop you didn't stop the meeting, you didn't ask for an attorney, you didn't ask specifically any of those kind of questions?
No, sir. It's a close balance between wanting to upset or rock the boat, or scream or cry foul, or cooperate and then roll the dice, and hopefully the best happens for you. That Edmondson just dies down. Edmondson knew he wasn't being forthright and truthful from the beginning. He's just trying to conduct an investigation and inquiry. We could be disciplined, we could not be disciplined, could get a slap on the wrist, could get demoted. I have no idea what's going on at the time. Most certainly, I did not ever think that it would rise to the level of demotion. By no means did I ever think that. That's been a huge effect on my family life and me. And if anything I've learned from this is that I am grateful that this did happen. Because for once, it forced me to actually focus on my family for the first time. So for 20 years, I've dedicated nothing but my life to the state police. And so this event has allowed me to spend time with my family, become a better husband, become a better father. So I'm grateful for everything that's happened from this. I truly, truly am. But I could have sworn, I could have thought that when I told them the truth and what kind of happened, because even they would ask me the question, did Edmondson know? And I said, you might want to ask me another question, because I knew he said he didn't. And then I answered it, because David McClendon said, there's 4 of y'all. Someone's going to say something, Rodney. And I said, well, yeah, he knew. He was on the phone. They overheard the conversations. I said, of course he knew. And he goes, okay. And I thought that would help somewhat in the overall event of what happened and what took place.
And was that conversation on the 20th or the 21st?
It was probably during both times, but I do remember it probably around the 20th.
Okay. So on the 21st, when you said you didn't know what to say, didn't know what I'm supposed to do, you actually said those 2 sentences twice today.
That's,
if you can, I'm trying to ask you, how do you reference those? What do you time those 2 questions, or those 2 sentences back to?
I think it's the fear of not knowing what's going to happen to you or what's going on. You know, in your mind, you think that you did everything right. You followed every policy that you feel that you could follow, that you interpreted as that. Your supervisors have now signed off on everything. They reviewed all your overtime and they signed off on it. They reviewed all of your travel documents and they signed off on it. They've seen every hotel overages. You've done all of this and everything you thought you were supposed to do. But yet you're sitting in an office being questioned and being, you know, interrogated and interviewed on a trip that you thought was approved by Edmondson and all fine and dandy, that everything you've done was all good to go, but yet you're sitting in this room and you're being questioned. So I don't know what I'm supposed to do at this point in time. I don't know. I'm doing the best I can with the situation I was dealt.
Okay. If we can, let's change our attention to your timesheets. You testified earlier that you have gone on travel prior to this.
Yes, sir.
Overnight airplanes, that kind of thing. Obviously not a lengthy road trip like this, but you have traveled before. When you traveled prior to this trip, did you claim 24 hours in a day?
No, sir. No, it was never done that way. It was always the interpretation of what's considered to be in transit. And I'm fine with that interpretation. I'm fine with that definition. If you read it, it pretty much leaves it up to when you're in transit till you reach your final destination. That was my logic. That was my thinking of it. It's wrong. I'm good with that. I apologize. But if it's wrong, then tell me it's wrong, and they did. And then so that's when it was revisited and relooked at through my supervisors.
I guess my question is, prior to this lengthy road trip, had y'all ever traveled via vehicle?
No, overnight. No, sir.
Okay. All right.
Mr. Crawford? Commissioner Crawford? Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Hey, Sergeant Ryan. Appreciate your patience today. I know you've been here a long time. Just a couple of follow-up questions. And these were some that I had asked some of the other witnesses as well, so I want to give you a fair opportunity to respond.
Yes, sir.
And I appreciate your comments on the accommodations and the meals. We have requirements in our policy as well, when people submit something that's incorrect. And I said it last week, it happens a lot more than people think. Usually the first level supervisor, it's their responsibility to review that, not just to sign off on it. They're supposed to look at it, and if it's correct, they forward it on to the revenue department or the accounting department, whoever pays for it. They're usually the bean counters, and they're the ones that look at it very meticulously. And in my experience, if something is not correct according to a tier or policy or room rate, they will often write it in pencil and say this is the maximum allowable rate, and then they'll send it back to the supervisor. He looks at it again. He gets to the individuals and say you need to correct your sheet. So I appreciate your comments there, and I think those policies with the state police and both travel for the state stipulate that you know, humans are not going to fill out everything correctly, especially if they don't do it on a regular basis. A lot of people, you know, that are in public service, we don't travel all the time. So it may be a once or a twice a year issue where we're traveling, and so I'm not focused so much on that as I am the detour to Vegas. And so I'm going to give you an opportunity to kind of clear that up for me a little bit. Because, and as I stated last week, taking the northern route, and let me just ask this question before I lose it, and I'll get back to this one. I want to be clear, the morning of the 10th, your testimony is that you still didn't know when everybody was assembled at the cafeteria that morning exactly what route was going to be taken. Is that true?
That's correct, sir.
Okay, so it was kind of determined that morning after kind of tossing some ideas around that the northern route would be chosen. Okay. So am I to assume that the reservations for the hotel in Las Vegas were not made until after the decision was made that morning, I guess somewhere en route, or when was that actually booked?
That was booked on that day after we had gone en route later that night.
Okay. And I have to ask you kind of a personal question, because if I told my wife we were going on the southern route, she would have never shown up that morning for me. So if all I was going to see was desert all day long, she wouldn't have taken that ride. So your wife must have been a real trooper to show up that morning with you, knowing that we can go south and see desert for 3 days, or we're going to go north.
You know what I was shocked about, though, to be quite honest with you?
Sure.
That it's pretty much desert going north, too.
Yeah.
I didn't realize that either. And it's pretty much barren and
Right.
desert going that way as well. My wife was scheduled to testify. I don't think it would be necessary, though.
I don't think it's necessary.
But she is a trooper, and she is a good wife. And she has helped me a lot through this and with this, and to listen to her cry every night knowing what the truth is, and we going through this, and I gotta give it to her. She would have went anywhere we asked her to do, or do anything we told her to do.
Okay, good deal. Okay, let me go back to the map and redirect you to the map. And this is what personally I'm having the biggest challenge with, is the fact that you, let's see, you reach the Grand Canyon on the, what time did you reach the Grand Canyon on the 11th? Do you know what time of the day it was?
It was approximately, I want to say, 6 o'clock, 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock. I'm not sure what was stipulated to. I don't want to say the wrong thing.
Let me check, let's see.
It has a time, not photos for date and time.
And that's about the time.
About 5 o'clock, somewhere in there.
It looks like it would have been,
That's MST. It's our mountain savings time.
what number is it?
53.
53.
if you look at 55 too, it kind of tells you the time frame.
Okay, so let's just say 6 o'clock.
Yes, it's about 6 o'clock.
So you get into the Grand Canyon at 6 o'clock, and looking at Google Maps, if I type in Tucson, Arizona, and San Diego, it says I can get there in a little less than 8 hours. So in the 2 previous days, based on even your own testimony, you had driven significantly more than 8 hours in those 2 days. And so you could have made from the Grand Canyon, you could have made San Diego easily. Even getting up late that morning and not leaving until 9 or 10 like you did Vegas the next day, you could have gotten into San Diego before dark, which would have given you plenty of time to rest, and you would have made your conference the next day. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
So, like I said, personally, that's what I'm having the biggest challenge with. There was a conscious decision somewhere along the way to say, hey, if I'm going to make my conference that I'm scheduled to attend, it's not the other appellants, we need to go ahead and get up and leave for Arizona. Leave from Arizona this morning. We need to go ahead and drive straight into San Diego, and we'll be there. Get the night before, get everything squared away in our hotels, get up fresh in the morning, and go to my conference. So somewhere in there, a conscious decision was made, a bad one, in my opinion, that said, no, we're going to Vegas, which is only, how many hours was it from Grand Canyon to Vegas? 3 or 4 hours?
That's a little
Maybe, not
longer
that
than
long.
that, it seemed like.
Oh. It's 8 hours to San Diego
I
from
think
there.
that's right, Robin.
Let's say halfway. You know, so you're only driving for 4 hours that day,
Yes, sir.
which is the 3rd day.
Yes, sir.
You know. So I guess I'm trying to ask you to help me
I think
understand what your thought process were.
a lot of it is that because we had authorization from the colonel to stay there, that was one of the main locations that it was there. We knew that that's where we were going to go.
But you testified yourself that you had absolutely no state business to be doing in Las Vegas.
I don't think, if you look at anything along the route, I don't know if it's considered state business though, sir, I really don't.
Well, no, I mean, I'll give you the benefit of the doubt. I think as you're driving, I think you're doing state business because you're trying to reach your final destination. What I'm trying to
In my
understand
mind,
is you drive straight from the Grand Canyon to San Diego, you're still doing state business.
Yes, sir.
8 hours, not even a long driving day with 4 people in the car that are driving 2 hours apiece. You get there, you're done.
So in my mind, the route as discussed by Edmondson was that route. So in my mind, that is our route. So, but let me back you up to that. When you look at the time that we drove to Amarillo, the time we had been up that day, and then we get up and we go to the Grand Canyon.
Which was a personal choice again,
Yes, sir. Yes,
Okay.
sir. By all means, but in that directional route or whatever.
but that's not in the directional route. With all due respect, you're way off the directional route
Yes,
even
sir.
by the map. So you're making a conscious decision that I'm gonna add time and fatigue to
Yes.
the trip. So that's not something you can push back onto the state or even the colonel, in my opinion. Unless you show me something that says I order you to go to the Grand Canyon.
Yes, sir.
Okay, all right. And I'll say this, don't get me wrong, Colonel Edmondson didn't do you guys any favors. I believe he directed you to take the northern route, I believe he directed you to do a lot of things on here. There's also personal responsibility, you know, and that we have to take into account too. And I'm holding the Colonel responsible for a lot of this mess.
Well, I'll be honest with you, I think about that every day.
Yes, sir.
And that the things that we should have done better and the things that we could do better.
Okay, just a couple more. On your, can we go to exhibit 71? And I'm looking, there were three timesheets that were submitted, is that right? Sergeant Hyatt? At the end of the day, it was the original, I don't know how many, they're not numbered, so they're kind of in the back of the document on 71. It's like the three there's 3 expense sheets.
3 expense sheets, yes, sir.
Right. And I'm just looking at the first one, and that had all the tier 3. And then I go, are we there? I don't want to get ahead of you.
I'm looking at some right now, yes, sir.
Okay. And then I look at the second one, and that has some of the adjustments for tier 2 for the first 3 destinations. And I look at finally a third one, which is 2 more pages back, and I'm assuming this is your final amended sheet, this third one where you don't have any charges for the 11th or the 12th. No charges for any type of meals. Is that the one I'm looking at? Is that right?
I think so, sir. I apologize.
That's okay. It's like the last 6 pages. Like I said, the first one starts off, the document kind of looks like this. It's like the first one, and it
It says Exhibit C at the bottom, do you see?
No, I don't have, well,
The very other page, sir.
yeah, Exhibit C, you're right.
Is that
Yeah.
the one you're looking at,
Yes.
Exhibit C?
Yeah, flip to the second page of Exhibit C.
Yes, sir.
Okay, this is your original expense submission, is that correct?
Yes, sir, it appears to be. Yes, sir.
Okay. And I flip back 2 more pages, and I'm assuming that this is your amended, this is Exhibit D.
Yes, sir, what they told me to, yes, sir.
Okay, and this was amended when?
I think they said somewhere in January.
Because the thing is, they don't have dates on them, so.
No, it counted as the date of the claim, but I think
Right.
it was testified it was somewhere time in January.
Okay, so January 17th, you think, okay, and then 2 more pages in, is this is Exhibit E, would this be your final amended copy that you turned in, that you actually, I guess, calculated some of the repayment on?
Yes, sir, I did the best I could.
This is the one you voluntarily submitted?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And so, on the 11th and the 12th, you don't have any reimbursement down there for meals. Was there a reason for that? I mean, you are still traveling.
But those are the 2 things we did off route, sir.
Okay.
It was considered to be off route.
Okay. The whole day wasn't off route,
But
but
it doesn't matter, sir.
you're erring on the side of caution and just saying, I'm taking the meals off, and,
Yes, sir.
okay, just want to be clear on that. When you went to the state police headquarters on the 10th, did you have breakfast there?
I was told to meet at the breakfast.
Did you eat while you were there?
I did not eat.
Okay, so you got breakfast on the road somewhere?
I didn't eat it all that morning. I don't typically eat breakfast.
Okay, I'm just saying, there's a charge for breakfast that morning.
Yes, when you leave your residence,
Sure.
your time starts, and 0600 is the time to claim for breakfast.
Okay, even if you don't have breakfast?
Even if you don't eat breakfast, yes, sir, you're entitled to the
Okay,
allowance.
fair enough. On the 16th was the Torrey Pines golf tournament. I think I heard you testify that you had lunch with a
Yes,
colonel
sir.
that day, and that, I can't remember the name of the company that supplied the lunch.
Tri-Tech.
Okay. And so on your amended timesheet, there's a lunch charge there.
Yes, sir, there is.
Is that like the other, if you're out for lunch, you just get the whole day, or?
That's,
And then I'm just trying to get some education on my behalf.
Yes.
I haven't read every policy that you have.
okay, so typically, that's what is charged, or that's what we've always charged. When I was with the lieutenant colonels, that's how it was done, so I just copied it and kept on going that way with it.
So if I looked at Colonel Edmonston's sheet, he probably would have a charge on there as well.
Maybe.
That's
sir.
not a question for you,
No.
guys. Just being facetious. Okay. So you're saying that it's whether or not somebody's providing you a meal, a vendor, for instance, it's still standard practice under Colonel Edmonston's. It was his practice to go ahead and you just billed for the day, no matter who paid for what or if you ate or not.
When I'm with them, I'm usually with Colonel Dupuy, Colonel Edmondson around them.
Sure.
I usually copy their sheets, and there's been times when, yes, sir, that there was a vendor provided meal that we've actually claimed, yes, sir.
Okay. And that was the instance in this case.
That was the instance in this case, yes, sir.
Okay. There was testimony last week that you had showed no remorse took no responsibility for your actions. Just for the record, I heard today, you say that you were late getting to SPO's conference. That's no excuse, that's on me. I heard you say that, about 3 meals that were provided by the SPO's conference, that you didn't even know they were available, and that was your mistake. I heard that you say that you made a mistake charging time for the zoo visit in the La Jolla Drive. I'm from Louisiana, I can't pronounce California cities. And I also heard you say that when you submitted your timesheets in March, that it was the right thing to do when you did it voluntarily. So I certainly heard that today, and I appreciate it. It goes a long way with me personally. I think that's all I have, Mr. Chairman.
I just gotta follow up to the question that you asked, 'cause I don't think I heard an answer to the question. Why not? Why didn't you leave the Grand Canyon and go straight to San Diego?
Poor decision making, sir. The bottom line, we were tired and we were looking for a place, and to be quite honest with you, they never seen the Grand Canyon. I never seen the Grand Canyon. And wanted to see it, and when we left there that day, we should have. We should have done a lot of things that I wish we would have done to this day. And if I could take a lot of it back, I would. But what happened, happened. I can't change that.
You stopped in Las Vegas,
Yes, sir.
stayed up rather late in Las Vegas. And I understand that's not what's at issue, it's not part of your discipline, but it's part of the question I'm asking you.
Yes, sir.
Stayed up late the night in Las Vegas, right?
I did, not the rest of the group.
You did.
Yes, sir.
And you know, got a late start the next day, even though the rest of the group didn't, but you had a conference to get to.
Yes, sir.
All right. Have you ever taken a trip before where you had multiple destinations? Let me try to explain what I mean by the question. You go into one conference, one meeting, or one something in city A, and before you come back home, you gotta go to another conference, another meeting, or another something in city B. Have you ever done that before?
No, sir, I haven't.
That's all.
I don't have anything further.